Chapter 823. The Enhai Nebula was very large. The deeper one went, the denser the dust-like objects became. The distant starry sky became blurry, even impossible to see. In such a space environment, it was difficult to maintain absolute stability in the warp channel. For safety reasons, human spaceships would never enter unless there were special circumstances, and the speed of flight would also be reduced a lot. In other words, when a spaceship was traveling in the nebula, it was the easiest to calculate its flight path in advance, and it was the easiest to be attacked. Fortunately, this place was close to the most prosperous region of the Federation of the Milky Way, and the space pirates had been wiped out a long time ago. It was quite safe here. Besides, the Scorching Sun battleship was the latest model of the Federation. Who would dare attack it? When the journey is long and the scenery is the same, it becomes tedious. Jingjiu fell silent for a longer period of time. Zhong Lizi didn't know that he was preparing for the upcoming battle. She thought that he was in that kind of mood again, so she asked Jingjiu gingerly if he wanted to go back to the gaming cabin to have a look. "I'm not playing games," Jingjiu said. "I'm doing math problems." Thinking of her life in the apartment in the underground neighborhood, Zhong Lizi suddenly felt uneasy while looking at the wall-like window and the glowing dust of the starry sky outside the window. In such a short period of time, her life had changed so much, and now she was embarking on a journey to the main planet. It really made her feel like she was dreaming. It was all because of this young man in a blue hoodie. "I won't ask who you are or where you came from, but I really want to know." She looked into Jingjiu's eyes and asked sincerely, "Why did you choose me?" Jingjiu thought to himself that if there was a reason, it could only be that he was wary of the immortal chi weapons such as nuclear bombs, and that the TV screen at home just happened to be showing that kind of news. That night, the female priest of the Stargate had asked Jingjiu a similar question, and his answer was that he didn't care. Gods did not need to care about such things. No matter how ordinary her talent was, or how ugly she was, it wouldn't affect Jingjiu's decision. He would still cure her illness, help her cultivation, and bring her to the University of Stargate to become the new female priest. But other than that answer, there really was another reason. To this world, he was a guest. Whether he admitted it or not, being a stranger in a foreign land was a difficult thing to bear, especially that single word. He wrote that book and asked the Twirling Rain Company to change it into a game and promote it to the whole universe. Other than the insecurity, it was mostly due to the spiritual level. Though he didn't need them, he would like to find the ascendants from Chao Tian, especially those he knew, like the Immortal Tan, Chao Yuan, and Jian Shilai. Of course, the Snow Girl was the best choice. Zhong Lizi was the first person Jingjiu got to know in this world, and she was the first cause and effect. If the world was an endless sea of stars, she would be the anchor point. On the spiritual plane, it was a very important existence. Zhong Lizi waited for a long time, but Jingjiu didn't answer her. But she noticed that under the illumination of the starlight, the face covered by the blue hoodie became brighter, and the beautiful eyebrows became much gentler. Then she understood how important she was to him, and her eyes narrowed with delight. Just as she was about to take another step forward and sit on the deck chair, a shrill alarm suddenly sounded in the warship. Not long after, the door was violently pushed open. Ran Handong walked in the front, a grave expression on her face. Jiang Yuxia, Hua Shi, and a few main preachers follow behind her, feeling a bit nervous. Out! Before Zhong Lizi could finish her sentence, Ran Handong had walked past her and came before the deck chair. She said to Jingjiu quickly, "Two warships have appeared up ahead, refusing to communicate with them. They don't have any military marks. The warming up of the weapon system is over. Our warship has already collected the digital longitudinal waves." The collection of the digital longitudinal waves indicated that the Scorching Sun battleship had been locked on by the enemy and could launch an attack at any moment. Jingjiu got up and walked to the front of the floor-to-ceiling window, looking at the space outside. Ran Handong followed him and said, "The distance between the two warships is 1,300,000 kilometers. It's very difficult to slow down and turn around to evade the attack, and that's the entrance of the passage." Looking at the space outside the window, Jing Jiao didn't say anything. Even though he had the fairy sword eyes, he couldn't see the scene more than 1 million kilometers away. But he seemed to be able to see the two unnumbered warships. The alarm of the scorching sun battleship changed its tone. The messy footsteps could be heard in the distance, followed by the heavy sounds of machinery and the buzzing of the electromagnetic machine. In a short time, the protective shield of the battleship had been adjusted to the highest level, looking like a glowing drill in the dark space. Jing Jiao folded his hands behind his back, the rings on his finger emitting a faint glow. Thinking of the scene she had seen in the warehouse in the central area, Ran Handong asked in a low voice, "Did you know about it a long time ago?" Jing Jiao didn't pay any attention to her. Ran Handong came before him and asked through gritted teeth, "If you knew about it a long time ago, why didn't you tell us in advance?" "This is my problem," said Jing Jiao. "I'll solve it myself." "How?" "By relying on the authority I gave you? Or those nuclear bombs that you've tampered with somehow?" Ran Handong couldn't stand it any longer. She looked at him as if she were looking at a madman, exclaiming, "We are in space. What can the nuclear bombs do?" The main hazards of the nuclear bombs were the shock wave, the light radiation, the penetrating radiation, the radioactive pollution, and the electromagnetic pulse. If the bombs were dropped on the ground, they could cause a great deal of damage. However, in the space devoid of air, the power of the nuclear bombs would be greatly reduced, and the damage of the light radiation, the radioactive pollution, and the electromagnetic pulse would have no effect on the people on the battleship. The battleship that could pass through the warp space wouldn't be affected even if a nuclear bomb exploded a few hundred kilometers away, and it didn't even need to put down the composite material. Jing Jiao was aware of all this, but he still didn't pay any attention to her. Ran Handong exclaimed anxiously, "Don't act recklessly if you don't know anything about it. If you intend to bombard the monsters of the sea of dark matter, you can do whatever you want, but it's useless." All of a sudden, the alarm on the battleship stopped ringing. The people in the room eyed each other speechlessly, wondering what had just happened. Was it possible that the two battleships were not dangerous, and what had happened was merely a misunderstanding? It was then that Ran Handong heard the voice in her bracelet. "What have you done?" she asked Jing Jiao. "It's too noisy," replied Jing Jiao. Hearing this, Zhong Lizi seemed to have guessed something. She let out a surprised scream reflexively, and then covered her mouth hastily. In the next moment, more and more surprised screams broke out on the battleship. The officers and soldiers on the battleship suddenly found that their control stations had been taken over by the computers, and even the authority of the captain of the battleship had been temporarily taken away. The Scorching Sun battleship, which was decelerating, quivered slightly, and then sailed forward at a normal speed again. Ran Handong's expression changed slightly. She ran to the side window and looked at the outside of the battleship, an incredulous expression showing on her face. A dozen nuclear bombs appeared in her field of vision, looking exceedingly cold and gloomy under the dim light of the nebula. All of a sudden, a few chilly blue glows appeared on the nuclear bombs. The propelling devices emitted a different glow than usual, and they were propelled forward at a much higher speed than usual. In the next moment, more and more nuclear bombs left the battleship, heading toward the deep and dark space along with the glow. He had indeed modified the propelling devices of the nuclear bombs. "It's useless." Ran Handong turned around and said while staring into his eyes, "Even if you can change the speed of the missiles, you can't change the scale of the universe." The difference between the speed of 60,000 kilometers per hour and the speed of 600,000 kilometers per hour was meaningless in a battle between battleships. The officers and soldiers on the battleship had also discovered what had happened. They rushed to the observation windows on both sides of the battleship in tandem, their expressions bewildered and nervous. Thousands of nuclear bombs left the battleship and headed toward the space ahead, looking like a rain of metal being swallowed by the darkness. It was a magnificent scene, but it was useless. It was then that a voice burst out on the battleship. "Don't be nervous, little friends on the Scorching Sun battleship. This is merely an inspection." The officers and soldiers on the Scorching Sun battleship including the captain of the battleship, looked in the direction of the voice reflexively, wondering if they had connected to the other party. The voice was calm and gentle. The image of a middle-aged professor wearing glasses seemed to appear in front of everyone's eyes. The battleships of the two parties couldn't communicate with each other. It was Jing Jiao who had cut off the network. The reason they could communicate with each other was that he wanted to hear what the other party had to say, but he didn't want to hear the nonsense from the other party. "Hurry up," he said. The voice went on with a hint of a smile. "Do you feel annoyed? I don't like it either. Fortunately, this is the last time." Jing Jiao said, "Yes, this is the last time." Chapter 824. Zhong Lizi couldn't understand the conversation, and Jiang Yuxia and Hua Shi were even more baffled. Looking at the figure of Jing Jiao standing in front of the window, the three girls suddenly felt that he was about to leave. Because of her family background, Ran Handong had been interested in the shadows and the history since she was a child. She knew about the organization related to the butterfly. Hearing the conversation between Jing Jiao and that person, she recalled the 2 assassination attempts on Jing Jiao. She couldn't help but feel nervous, asking, What are you going to do?" Jing Jiao didn't answer her question. He looked at the space outside the window, his line of sight fixed on the invisible distance. On the other side of the space, 100,000 kilometers away, the stardust reflected a faint glow, making the figures of the 2 battleships look even more dreadful. The battleship in the front was entirely black, looking a bit old, like a huge sword that hadn't been unsheathed for many years. In the command room at the head of the battleship, hundreds of soldiers were observing and analyzing the data in their respective positions. There was a huge chair on the second floor of the battleship. The chair was made of a large piece of blood jade, with 2 dragons carved on the armrests, looking very luxurious and a bit exaggerated. A middle-aged man sat in the chair in silence. His silver-rimmed glasses reflected the faint light outside the window, making it impossible to discern the emotion in his eyes. The alarm was blaring in the battleship, but it was not shrill. No worry could be seen on the people's faces. The Scorching Sun battleship was said to be the latest and most advanced battleship of the Federation, but looked like a clumsy child compared to this battleship. The most advanced technology and weapons of the Federation of the Milky Way were hidden in places where the populace couldn't see them, like this battleship. 3566, I-09, 2278. Approaching Sturge Curve. Dynamic imbalance. The steady voice of an officer broke out on the battleship. The battleship had a complete grasp of the situation of the Scorching Sun battleship through a dozen space detectors. The battleship had learned about the Scorching Sun battleship not long after the thousands of missiles with nuclear warheads had left the Scorching Sun battleship. The atmosphere on the battleship was still calm, not at all tense. The officers were doing their jobs calmly. Laughter could be heard once in a while, and the atmosphere was quite relaxed. The laughter was mocking the foolishness of the commander of the Scorching Sun battleship. It was indeed ridiculous to use nuclear warheads in a space war. Even if their battleship was a regular battleship of the Federation, it would be impossible for it to be hit by the missiles. These nuclear bombs could not pose a threat to the battleship because they were too slow. The speed of those missiles seems to be a problem. A staff officer looked at the lines formed by the light dots on the hologram and said in surprise. As his voice fell, the line formed by the light dots stretched forward by a large margin. Dozens of eyes fell on the light screen, and there were some discussions. The missile launched by the Scorching Sun battleship was indeed a bit strange, as it was obviously traveling at a higher speed. Could it be that they've all switched to crystal engines? There's no report from the department. No fleet has the ability to complete the modification alone. Then what's with this speed? There's also something wrong with the distribution of the bullets. Look at this curve. It feels like a regular distribution. The staff officers on the warship continued to analyze and calculate, but they were still not very nervous. No matter how much the propulsion system of those nuclear warheads was modified, even if their speed was 10 times faster, they would not be able to threaten the warships. Even if the nuclear warheads were within tens of thousands of kilometers, the warships would only need a volley of laser cannons to detonate them in advance. A lieutenant colonel came before the chair made of blood jade and asked, "General, should we fire them in advance?" Looking at the dark space outside the window, the middle-aged man seemed to see those distant nuclear warheads. "What's the hurry?" he asked disinterestedly. Thousands of nuclear warheads had left the scorching sun battleship and disappeared into the dark space. It was unclear how long it would take for them to reach the two battleships on the other side. It seemed that they had to wait patiently, and there was no need to hurry. The atmosphere on the scorching sun battleship was tense. Everyone, including the captain of the ship and the regular mechanic soldiers, had lost their authority and could only wait helplessly for the final result. Zhong Lizi came to the side of Jingjiu with a teacup in her hand and said softly, "Have some tea." Jingjiu took the teacup and had a sip before saying, "I'm going out for a while." The expression on Zhong Lizi's face changed slightly, wondering what he was going to do now that he was not in charge of the overall situation on the battleship. A gust of wind suddenly rose in front of the large French window, tousling her hair. Jingjiu disappeared from the original spot. In the next moment, the faint screams of Jiang Yuxia and Hua Shi rang out in the room. A figure they were very familiar with appeared outside the window. It was Jingjiu. His blue hoodie tousled without the aid of the wind. The dim light of the nebula shone on his body and the side of his face, making him look dreamlike. The swordsman in the star state could move freely in the vacuum of the universe devoid of air and gravity, but they couldn't move as casually as Jingjiu. Seeing this, the people in the room were stunned speechless, wondering what he was going to do next. Jingjiu looked at the distant space in silence, calculating. Thousands of missiles were like thousands of light spots, moving forward in his awareness and forming thousands of lines. Those lines didn't seem to have any connection with each other, and they didn't form any diagram, but the light spots had gradually grown apart, forming two lines. They were like the trees by the road and the wildflowers by the railroad tracks, forming a passageway, welcoming someone to walk through it. Jingjiu took a deep and slow breath, and then he realized that he still felt hot, even though there was no air here. He leaned back slightly and then flew forward, disappearing from the window of the battleship. A bright and beautiful sword light suddenly appeared in the dark universe. The sword light flashed by. Soon, it was thousands of miles away from the scorching sun battleship. There was a lone nuclear bomb, flying the slowest, lagging behind. The sword light was like a flame that lit up the fuse of fireworks. It was soundless. The nuclear bomb exploded. A great deal of light and heat were ejected in all directions, forming a rapidly expanding sphere. Seeing this clear scene, many cries of surprise broke out on the scorching sun battleship. What's going on? Why did it explode in advance? Did they launch a laser cannon or a plasma beam? Wait, what's that light? Many people on the scorching sun battleship saw the light. Only the girl in the room at the head of the battleship figured out who the light was. That beam of light was so straight and sharp, just like the sword light in those stories. The sword light pierced through a nuclear bomb and ignited it. Not only was it not affected, but it also became brighter and faster. Then the second, the third, and dozens of nuclear bombs were ignited by the sword light one after another. Hundreds of bright light spots appeared in the dark space. They were like the street lamps by the roadside. They shone on the people moving forward. Everybody goes to the Yuan conference. It's the same every year. I can't avoid it either. I'm always on the move. Please forgive me for the lack of updates. Let's sing the old song happily. Light up 1,000 lamps. The one who lights the lamps wants to pass the light to others. Chapter 825. Zhong Lizi, Ran Handong, and the others had rushed to the floor-to-ceiling windows a while ago, watching the marvelous scene in the space. Hundreds of nuclear bombs exploded one after another, scattering in all directions like fireworks. The sword light traveled faster and faster among them, leaving behind a long trail of flames, looking like a comet. The young girls were extremely nervous. Even if that person was a swordsman in the star state, or even the inherited night state who was more powerful than they had imagined, Wouldn't he die if he traveled through the nuclear bombs? It was well known that the high temperature in the center of the nuclear bombs was similar to the inside of a permanent star, and the terrifying light radiation was unbearable for humans. An alarm rang out on the unnumbered battleship. It was a real alarm this time. The alarm sounded a bit hurried, and the expressions on the people's faces grew a bit more solemn, but only a bit more. The explosion of the nuclear bombs launched by the Scorching Sun battleship was confirmed a few seconds later, and the data on the yield of the bombs had been obtained. The protective shield of the battleship was activated as soon as it could, and then it started preparing for the emergency plan. Standing in front of the light screen and looking at the nuclear bombs exploding one after another in the distance, the staff officers furrowed their eyebrows in bewilderment. At such a long distance, the explosions of the nuclear bombs wouldn't have any effect on the battleship. What was the commander of the Scorching Sun battleship thinking about? Hundreds of nuclear bombs had already exploded, and more were traveling at a high speed, as if they were soldiers who had received an order to gather at a certain place. No matter how fast the nuclear bombs traveled, they couldn't reach the battleship in a short time. The officers and soldiers on the battleship had enough time to analyze why the Scorching Sun battleship was in such a mess that day. The exploding nuclear bombs looked like countless fireworks shooting out in all directions, shining like the stars in the distant space, blocking the sword light hidden among them. Nobody noticed the sword light, save for the middle-aged man sitting on the chair made of blood jade. He was an ascendant from Chowtian and a grandmaster who founded the Bloody Demon Church, a true ferryman, so he could sense the changes of the energy of heaven and earth. A blood-red glow covered his eyes, looking a bit eerie. In the next moment, a few complicated amulets appeared on the smooth lenses of his glasses. The sword light that shuttled between the exploded nuclear bombs was reflected in his eyes. After a moment of silence, he curled up the corners of his mouth and murmured, "Interesting." The first thing any ascendant from Chowtian to the Federation of the Milky Way did was to learn how to deal with this kind of fairy energy weapon. These ascenders were all true immortals with indestructible immortal bodies. The light and heat energy of a nuclear bomb was extremely powerful, but as long as a certain distance was maintained and the time of contact was short enough, one would not be injured. But this required extremely precise calculations of the distance, and it was extremely risky. Perilous. Why did the sword light travel between the exploding nuclear bombs? Just to cover his tracks and guard against the warship's long-range weapons so that he could sneak to the front of the warship and launch an ambush? Looking at the nuclear bombs that were ignited one after another in the distance, the middle-aged man seemed to see a sword immortal of a generation turning into an assassin, rushing into the distance with the intention of killing him. It was indeed interesting. It was indeed a good move. It was a pity that these little kids who had just broken out of their cocoons would never know what kind of prowess the combination of cultivation and interstellar technological civilization would have. The middle-aged man adjusted his glasses, and the smile on his lips faded. The inspection was over. Now that those guys asked him not to kill this little guy, the inspection had no choice but to end. The power displayed by the sword light and its unstoppable energy made him not confident that he could defeat his opponent without employing his most powerful method. Is it true that each generation is more powerful than the previous one? Thinking of the broadsword man who had cut the warship in half with a swing of his broadsword 2 days ago, the middle-aged man sighed, feeling bored. He was about to send out a signal to tell his opponent that the inspection was over and that their encounter could end peacefully. It was then that he suddenly found that the situation was out of his control. The urgent alarm rang out on the warship. The long-range surveillance system had finally discovered the sword light. It was because the sword light had become faster. How was it possible? The middle-aged man got up and looked at the dark space outside the window. His expression grew grave as he saw more and more stars being lit up. He had vaguely guessed what the sword light intended to do, but he couldn't figure out how he had done it. The nuclear bombs wouldn't become more powerful after being carved with the amulets, but they would move faster and more obedient. For example, just like now, they obediently lined up in 2 rows, extending into the distance like street lights towards the invisible battleship. The two nuclear bombs in the front had exploded, turning into two bright and pale fireballs. The sword light passed through the fireballs at a faster speed. Standing at the front of the sword light, Jing Jiao was thinking of all this and other matters while looking at the flames receding at a high speed in his peripheral vision. In comparison to that world, this world was much larger. The distance between the two warships was longer than the distance between Chaotian and the alien land. The more troublesome part was that the speed of light in this world was much slower, so his speed was much slower as well. It would take at least 30 seconds to fly from the scorching sun battleship to that warship, enough time for him to think of many things. Since he came to this world, he had been pondering an important issue: how to ensure that he was the strongest swordsman. The laser weapons were fast enough, but they were not powerful enough to hurt him. The speed of the nuclear bombs was too slow. The gravitational field was a fixed device. The military of the Federation of the Milky Way might have some hidden weapons. He would deal with them when he encountered them. Having solved the problem of defense, Jing Jiao had to solve the problem of offense. This world was too large. Even if he traveled as fast as he could, it would be difficult for him to travel back and forth as he did in Chaotian, and it would consume a great deal of energy. For instance, if he wanted to attack a target 100,000 kilometers away, it would consume a great deal of energy even if he traveled as fast as he could, and he would be like an arrow at the end of its flight. How could he maintain his speed and make it even faster? Jing Jiao had come up with a method to let the nuclear bombs explode one after another along the way to propel him. The fairy energy generated by the explosions of the nuclear bombs would be the best source of energy for him as long as it didn't harm him. This method was simple and crude, but it required a precise calculation, and it was only useful for him. It was fine as long as it was useful. The nuclear bombs exploded one after another, and the fairy energy rolled over. Jing Jiao kept on absorbing the fairy energy at a faster and faster speed. It was an unimaginable speed. The nebula changed shape and became blurry in front of his eyes. The light and heat emitted by the nuclear bombs turned into faint lines. The warship was getting closer. Whoosh! The large floor-to-ceiling windows of the warship swayed slightly. Dozens of sword lights passed through the air, the chair of blood jade, and the body of the middle-aged man. They gradually disappeared on the ground, revealing the figure of Jing Jiao. Crack! Along with a cracking sound, a crack appeared on the large floor-to-ceiling windows. Dozens of straight cracks appeared on the hard alloy floor, as if it had been scratched by an invisible monster. Chapter 8:26. As the sword light approached, the alarm on the black battleship grew more and more urgent. The middle-aged man's glasses couldn't conceal the grave expression in his eyes. The sword light traveled among the fireworks of the nuclear bombs, growing brighter and brighter. The Federation of the Milky Way hadn't seen such a fast-flying device. The people on the battleship looked at the image on the light screen, their faces full of shock and incredulity. What in the world was that? How could it fly so fast? As the people were guessing what it was, the speed of the sword light had increased to an unimaginable level, and it had even disappeared from the light screen. In the next moment, the scene took place. A crack appeared on the floor-to-ceiling window. A crack appeared on the ground. A crack appeared on the blood jade stone. Dozens of sword lights passed through everything, including the body of the middle-aged man. The sword lights faded away slowly and turned into the figure of Jing Jiao. The sword wheels were still there. They traveled through the whole battleship, destroying everything wherever they passed. The engines of the battleship started to explode. The blue electric arcs flashed like lightning at the stern of the battleship, followed by a loud, booming noise. It wasn't until then that the battleship sent out the alarm of being invaded. Everybody was stunned. They came back to their senses after a while and started to be on guard as quickly as possible. Pa, 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 pa. Along with the heavy sounds of machinery being assembled, a dozen combat armors had taken shape. The middle-aged man looked at the outside of the window in silence. It was unclear what he was thinking. A moment later, He turned around slowly and asked Jingjio, "What sword style is this?" "All-in-one sword," replied Jingjio. The middle-aged man said with furrowed brows, "I've seen it before, but it's not as powerful as yours." "This is my all-in-one," said Jingjio. What he meant was not the true meaning of the sword work he had comprehended in Chaotian. It was not the difference between it and the all in one of the grandmasters of Aoyama. What he meant was the range of the sword work changed along with the expansion of heaven and earth. All in one sword. Thousands of nuclear bombs were also his sword. General Lee had said something when he defeated Jian Shalai on that mineral planet a few days ago. It was the true integration of heaven and man when one combined the cultivation methods of Chaotian with the technology of this world. Jingjio had done so. The middle-aged man couldn't understand and asked, "Didn't you just come out?" "It's been a long time," said Jingjio. He had been in this world for more than 100 days. It was indeed a long time. Back when he was in the small village in Chaotian, it only took him 9 days to get everything prepared. The middle-aged man shook his head and said, "No, it's not that simple." Jingjio had to admit that it was not easy to use this sword. This was different from learning to chop vegetables, cook, clean, farm, and make bamboo chairs. He had prepared for this strike for a long time. Tengu, who was in the underground laboratory of the Stargate, had given him the detailed information of all the warships and nuclear bombs of the Alliance. On the night of the selection of the priestess, he stood at the place closest to the gray canopy and watched the battleships in the night sky for a long time. On the soft chair in the underground apartment and on the chair on the balcony of the Stargate Hotel, he had calculated for many nights. In the end, he came up with this plan. "You're indeed very formidable, and your calculation and method are outstanding." The middle-aged man continued while staring into his eyes, "But if I hadn't been wounded first, you wouldn't have been able to kill me." Thinking of what had happened on that planet, Jingjio asked, "Was it you who went to kill Chao Yuan?" "I want to pick him up," said the middle-aged man. Jingjio said, "The person who asked you to pick him up wanted you to die." He had already guessed the identity of this middle-aged man. People with different beliefs could make their own plans, but most of the time, it was a fight to the death. The middle-aged man was the immortal Chi Song of the Bloody Demon Church. He had done all kinds of evil deeds in Chaotian. Though he restrained himself a bit in this world, he was still ruthless when it came to killing. Chao Yuan was the disciple of the Guocheng Temple, experiencing the mortal world, and the Broadsword King guarding the wind and snow alone. Though he had killed many people, he was a benevolent man. When they met, heaven and earth would shatter. What I don't understand is, why do you want to kill me? It seemed that the middle-aged man was truly baffled. "Because you want to kill me," said Jingjio. The middle-aged man sighed. "It's merely a test." Thinking of the bullet he caught in the square and the laser guns dropping down from the night sky, Jingjio fell silent for a while. Then he said, "Die." Having said that, the middle-aged man died. The immortal Chi Song was the most outstanding demonic swordsman of the deviant sects in the history of Chaotian. He founded the Bloody Demon Church and caused a great deal of suffering for tens of thousands of years, until Lu Shui. However, he died that day before he could react to the sword light. The 2 small wounds on his thumb and forefinger suddenly became deeper, and 2 pieces of his fingers fell off. In the next moment, his ears, nose, hair, and flesh were all cut into pieces and then chopped into mincemeat. Even his 3 spiritual souls, 10,000 demonic wills, and 9 paper corpses were cut into the tiniest particles and then turned into green smoke by the sword fire. A few drops of blood seeped out, drifting in all directions with a devilish intent. As they were about to touch those soldiers, they were cut into nothingness by the sword light. "No matter how many magic methods you have, I'll cut you all down with one swing of my sword." Those soldiers didn't know that Jingjio had saved their lives. They raised the weapons in their hands and started to attack. A dozen battle armors charged at him at a high speed while emitting a deep buzzing sound. The inside of the battleship was filled with the smoke from the missiles and the random laser beams. Jingjio raised his right hand. The missiles lost their direction and shot to other places at an oblique angle. A dozen violent explosions took place on the battleship. Many large holes appeared on the battleship, which was already badly damaged. The laser beams hit his body accurately, but they couldn't do any harm to him. The surface of his body was too tight and smooth, like a metal that had been combined by a super strong force. Most importantly, he started to move. The inside of the battleship was illuminated by the sword lights. The sword lights appeared on the transparent masks of the battle armors, the surfaces of the control stations used by the soldiers as bunkers, and the engines of the escaped spaceships that were in the process of being activated. Thousands of sword lights seemed to appear at various places on the battleship at the same time. Then, countless crisp cutting sounds could be heard. Crack! Crack! The whole world was quiet, save for the exploding engines at the rear of the battleship. Jingzhou pulled back his right hand. A faint sword was twirling around his finger. The large chair made of blood jade was cut in half, and the two lively dragons were dead. A pair of glasses with silver rims was among the broken pieces of jade. Jingzhou picked up the glasses and held them in his hand. The immortal Qi Song had a profound cultivation state, much more powerful than by Ren's. Among all the enemies he had encountered in his life, the Snow Girl was the only one who was more powerful. Even with the help of thousands of nuclear bombs, Yuan Shu could only use the all-in-one sword, which was the most powerful move he had. Logically speaking, he should only be able to injure this person severely. It would be difficult for him to kill his opponent completely. Even if Yuan Shu used his brain to think, he would know that the blood demon ancestor had countless secret techniques that could save his life. Yet, he had been wounded severely by the broadsword earlier. When was the last time the all-in-one sword of the Aoyama sect and the broadsword of the small temple in White Town met? Lu Xi had wielded his sword toward the scorching sun gorge before he turned into the spring rain. Chao Yuan struck with his broadsword in retaliation. The broadsword and the sword met. The scorching sun gorge had vanished, and the mysterious dark sect had been wiped out. Jingzhou's sword and Chao Yuan's broadsword met in the body of the immortal Qi Song that day. No matter how powerful the immortal Qi Song was, he had no choice but to die. Who in this universe could withstand such a collision of the broadsword and the sword? Since you intend to kill him, why did you say that to sow discord between us? A calm and nonchalant voice rang out. The black battleship was on fire. The three systems were all destroyed, and the shielding doors had all lost their effectiveness. The whistling sounds and explosions could be heard everywhere. In such a chaotic environment, the voice could be heard clearly and accurately by Jingzhou's ears. That person was not on the battleship. It was a long-distance call. Jingzhou said while rubbing his damaged earlobe. That statement was meant for you. Chapter 8:27. The immortal Qi Song had a brief conversation with Jingzhou before his death. One of the words in the conversation was very important. Jingzhou said that asking the immortal Qi Song to pick up Chao Yuan meant that Jingzhou wanted him dead. This speculation might be correct or wrong, but no matter what, the immortal Qi Song was going to die by Jingzhou's sword, and all the people on the battleship would die as well. As such, it was meaningless for Jingzhou to say it out loud. It was because he knew that someone had been communicating with this black battleship from a long distance and was watching everything that was happening. Jingzhou might not be able to get that person to come out even if he killed the immortal Qi Song and all the people on the battleship, but he could do it if he said it. If that person wanted to maintain his Tao, he would have to give an explanation, both to Jingzhou and to himself. Put down the butcher's knife and become a Buddha on the spot. Qi Song was willing to join our cause. I had no reason to refuse him. The calm voice echoed like a bell in the battleship that was gradually being destroyed. You shouldn't have killed him. Chao Yuan's voice sounded like a bell, but it sounded hoarse and unpleasant, like a broken bell. In comparison, Jingzhou preferred Chao Yuan's voice. It was evident that he had never put down his broadsword. Otherwise, Chao Yuan wouldn't have raised it to hack at him. Jingzhou looked at a spot diagonally above the battleship. The battleship was so badly damaged that it couldn't adjust itself. All the objects on the battleship had flown up and were flying everywhere in the air. There was a cable connected to a vibrating, sound-amplifying valve, which was where the voice came from. Jingjio didn't ask if the person was General Li or someone else, as he continued, and he intended to kill me. The person said, "You should be aware that we don't intend to kill you. Otherwise, you wouldn't have dared write that book." "It looks like I was wrong," said Jingjio. The person said, "The cultivation practitioners have a long life. Sometimes they have to face challenges again and again in order to find the meaning of their lives, and sometimes they have to strengthen themselves." "Have you been tested as well?" asked Jingjio. The person said, "All the cocoon breakers have to go through this process before they can become butterflies." "Only a little child would say such a thing," said Jingjio. The person said, "Come to the main planet. We'll meet there." Jingjio said, "If we meet..." He didn't finish his sentence because the call ended. The warship was severely damaged, and all data channels were disabled. The communicator on the webcam was swinging around randomly. It didn't look like a lost butterfly, but more like a kite in the wind that could be torn apart at any time. Jingjio flew a few hundred kilometers away from the battleship and turned around. The black battleship was slowly disintegrating into tens of millions of pieces, looking like a storm that was slowly flying in all directions. Even further away in space, another black battleship was entering the warp hole. Most of the battleship's body seemed to have disappeared into the void, leaving only its tail outside. Dark blue light shone around it. It was a very magical scene. He turned around and flew toward the scorching sun ship. Thousands of nuclear bombs were still exploding. Some had already dissipated, while others were still emitting intense light and heat. Relying on the immortal energy in space that had not dissipated, he flew back hundreds of thousands of kilometers effortlessly. Looking at the warship that had participated in his assassination, for some reason, he felt a sense of familiarity. The name of the Scorching Sun ship was the same as that of the Scorching Sun Gorge, so it was auspicious for him. No, it should be because he had someone close to him on the battleship. Cancel the alarm. Attention, all personnel on the battleship. The battleship is on standby. The data will be checked again in 3 minutes. The emotionless electronic voice echoed in the Scorching Sun ship. The captain of the battleship, the staff officers, and the regular mechanic soldiers came back to their senses after a while. They returned to their posts as quickly as possible and started to operate the ship. No one knew what had happened. Why did the battleship encounter 2 black battleships that were obviously hostile before the space passage of the Inhine Nebula, the safest sailing route in the Federation of the Milky Way? The existence of the 2 black battleships was already unbelievable. How could they hide from the eyes of the Federation of the Milky Way without any serial numbers or digital markings? The officers and men of the Scorching Sun ship were ready for the battle with bewilderment and nervousness, but they suddenly found that their authority had been taken away and the battleship was in the hands of someone else. As everybody was ready to face death, they found that thousands of nuclear bombs on the battleship had been launched. Thousands of nuclear bombs exploded one after another, illuminating the dark universe and forming a road leading to a distant place. Nobody could understand what had happened next. It was because nobody had seen the sword light except for the 4 girls by the window of the room. One of the black battleships was set ablaze and disintegrated. The other black battleship fled in a panic, disappearing from sight. "Please get out of the way. I want to know what has happened," the captain of the Scorching Sun ship said, while staring into the eyes of the main preacher. "You might be an important figure on the Stargate base, but this is my battleship. What has happened just now has proved that this is not your battleship." The main preacher continued calmly, while looking at him. "As for what has happened, I believe that the praying hall and the military headquarters will investigate it after we return to the main planet." After a moment of silence, the captain asked, "Where is Major Rand?" "I'd like to ask her," the main preacher said expressionlessly. "Major Rand is dealing with some urgent affairs." "I'll tell you what you said. She'll come to you when she is done." Having said that, the main preacher turned around and entered the room, saying nothing more. The captain remained silent for a long time while looking at the closed door of the room and thinking of the terrifying scenes earlier. He turned around and left as well. In the bedroom, in the deepest part of the suite, Zhong Lizi was helping Jing Jiao put on his clothes. Seeing his pale profile, she couldn't help but ask after a long moment of hesitation. "Are you all right?" Jing Jiao uttered and said, "I'm a bit tired." Zhong Lizi was well aware of his temperament. If he said he was tired, he would be really tired and extremely tired. She couldn't help but feel worried. Pushing open the door, she motioned for Jiang Yuxia and the others to leave first so that he wouldn't be disturbed. Jiang Yuxia hesitated a bit, but she didn't say anything in the end. She walked out of the room, holding Hua Xi's small hand. Ran Handong didn't leave. After staring at Jing Jiao's face for a long time, she suddenly asked, "Are you really the new god?" Jing Jiao didn't pay any attention to her. He lay on the chair. Zhong Lizi looked at Ran Handong and said rudely, "Please get out of here." Ran Handong had no choice but to walk out of the room after glancing at Jing Jiao a few times reluctantly. As Zhong Lizi turned her head around, she found that Jing Jiao had already fallen asleep. His face was a bit pale. She sat by the chair and caressed his face sympathetically. It was her birthday today, so she said those things to him and invited him to have dinner together, like what they had done in the apartment. It was a pity that she had encountered such an incident. Looking at the outside of the window, her pretty eyes and brows were illuminated by the sunlight. Some of the thousands of nuclear bombs had been extinguished, and some were still burning. It seemed that countless fireworks were taking place in the dark space. They also looked like burning butterflies. End of 8th volume, attached at the end. I've been writing what I like lately, so I've had a great time writing this volume. Thank you for reading this, because it's obvious that we share the same joy. I'll write the contents of the next 3 or 4 volumes in a happy mood. The poem at the beginning of the next volume is also very nice. Please enjoy it. And the last part is about the fireworks of the nuclear bombs. I remembered that someone laughed at a strange joke on the internet a long time ago, saying that a young master set off a few nuclear bombs to celebrate his young mistress's birthday in order to win her favor. It was quite ridiculous. I couldn't accept it at the time. It's nothing more than setting off a few nuclear bombs. How did Yi Tianqing use them back then? Chapter 828. When you look at me, my eyes are the key. The walls have secrets. My fears have words and poems. Only you can make my memories into a traveler obsessed with them, a ball of inexhaustible flame. The enlightened man, Alajinna Pizarnik, though the universe was not infinite, it was almost infinite for the intelligent beings living in it. Since it was a vast world, it had many different sceneries. Some planets were barren, some were rich, some were desolate, and some were as beautiful as the dreamland. The sceneries could be seen everywhere, and they were the kind of sceneries that the humans liked instinctively. The planet Tianpu was such a planet. After being modified by the distant ancient civilization for a great many years, the ecological system of the whole planet was almost perfect. After the extinction of the distant ancient civilization, the planet had maintained itself for tens of thousands of years without any problems. There is a saying in the Federation of the Milky Way that if one wished to see the remains of the distant ancient civilization, he didn't have to wait on the main planet. All he had to do was to travel to the planet Tianpu once. For these reasons, the Federation of the Milky Way protected this planet strictly, forbidding all mining and heavy industrial development. Besides the development of the ancient agriculture and tourism, the only thing one could see on this planet were the sanatoriums and universities built by the private financial groups. Countless green fields were spread out on the surface of the planet like a blanket, and then they were cut into innumerable small pieces by the automatic farm machinery. The fields had different colors depending on the variety of the crops and the passage of time. The Northwest University of China, the best university on the planet Tianpu and famous in the Federation of the Milky Way, was located in the midst of the endless fields. The old-style, fortress-like buildings were as eye-catching as Professor Go's broad forehead. Professor Go was an ordinary professor, and his only distinguishing feature was his protruding forehead. It was unclear whether his forehead was filled with fortune or wisdom. However, Since he could become a member of the Nuclear Research Institute of Northwest University, China, with a high authority, his forehead should be filled with wisdom. The immortal Tan had come to this world more than 100 days ago. In comparison to the legendary experiences of Jian Shilai and Chao Yuan, his story was rather ordinary, or it could be said that he was extremely lucky. After leaving Chao Tian, he didn't encounter the monsters of the Sea of Dark Matter or the fleet of the Federation of the Milky Way. He landed on this beautiful planet. Like all ascenders, he began to learn. What was different was that after mastering some basic knowledge, he didn't do anything else. First, he used the Cloud Dream Mountain's 3-Qian trigram to change his name. That person's name was Stay Away. Then, he used the most basic computer methods to modify the archives of a certain Northwest University China tutoring class without being connected to the internet. He began to play the role of a tutor and used a series of inconspicuous methods to enter Northwest University China. At the Northwest University of China, he played the role of a regular scholar who didn't know how to cultivate. He traveled back and forth between the dormitory, the research institute, and the library every day. He was very careful when surfing the internet, so he wouldn't touch any sensitive information. He wasn't like the foolish Jian Shilai who was eager to show off his computer skills, nor was he eager to save the world like Chao Yuan. Jing Zhou's appreciation for him was reasonable. If it were not for the fact that he needed to enter the Northwest University China Nuclear Research Institute, he would definitely hide in the vast farm for 60 years. No one would be able to find him. In the eyes of the students, Professor Go was uninteresting. His way of talking was not humorous, and his knowledge was not outstanding. Of course, it was not that he didn't have any knowledge at all. He was at the level of a regular professor, and he didn't have any hobbies. What they didn't know was that Professor Go would do 2 things every day after he returned to the dormitory: watch the news and watch the internet. Watching the news was the best way to learn about this world, and watching the internet was the best way to learn about the people in this world. The news in the Federation of the Milky Way was about the war with the Sea of Dark Matter and the dangers encountered by the colonized planets, which made the immortal Tan feel that the planet Tianpu was peaceful and beautiful. The internet was full of the fanatical belief that humans would win and the unrealistic martial artwork, which made him feel worried. Especially after he read a book on the internet one day, he was in a terrible mood. What is the immortal Jingyang thinking about? Looking at the words on the light screen, the immortal Tan said with a sigh, "You have written our Cloud Dream Mountain as the antagonist, but aren't you afraid that the previous ascenders will come to you?" He understood why Jing Zhou wanted to write and dared to write the book The Path Toward Heaven. The Aoyama sect had accounted for 6 of the more than 20 ascenders in Chaotian since the ancient times. If he could get in touch with these grandmasters of his sect, Jing Zhou would have nothing to fear. The resources of the Zhongzhou school were a bit lacking, and the Bai family had been in power in the last few thousand years, so he didn't dare take the risk. Though Chao Yuan could look forward to meeting the highly achieved monks of the Guocheng Temple, he didn't want to meet the Western Sea Sword School. Thinking of all this, the immortal Tan rubbed his forehead, feeling satisfied with his decision. Then, he looked at the light screen in front of him again. The treatment of a professor was much better than that of a minor. He arranged 17 television sets in the room, the light screens scattered here and there, looking like the patches on a beggar's clothes. A few news scenes appeared on the television sets one after another. A mining planet called Lindeng experienced a violent earthquake. The emergency department of the government and the mining department handled the situation well, and only 1 person died. The number 3 forward base showed signs of being invaded by the Sea of Dark Matter. A fleet used a nuclear bomb to barge into the space passage to block it, resulting in a great number of casualties among the civilians. The immortal Tan felt something was out of place. He remained silent for a long time after calculating on his fingers. No matter who was in trouble, he had no choice but to ignore it for the time being. Only by solving the problem of miniaturization of the nuclear engine could he have the support of the fairy energy and travel across the Milky Way freely. By then, he would be safe, and he would leave this place. As he was about to turn off the television and start his research, he suddenly heard a familiar name on a television. The successor of the priest of the Stargate, Miss Zonglizi, has arrived on the main planet on the Scorching Sun battleship. She is warmly welcomed by the officials of the government of the main planet and the College of Priests. Most of the news was broadcasted live, and it was the same that day. The distance between the main planet and planet Tianpu was very far, but the signal transmitted by the miniature warp passageway would arrive in a short time. Looking at the lively scenes on the television, the immortal Tan wished that he wouldn't see that person. The young girl named Zonglizi had already attracted his attention when she participated in the selection of the female priest of the Stargate. The people were everywhere in the harbor. Dozens of drones were hovering in the sky, transmitting the images of the battleship to all parts of the universe. The girl with red hair walked out, followed by a youth in a blue hoodie. The immortal Tan murmured, "How can you show up at this moment? Even if you want to show up, you should at least wear black, white, and gray clothes. Blue is too conspicuous." What happened next was beyond his expectation. The youth in the blue hoodie took off his hat, exposing his face. It was believed that nobody in the Federation of the Milky Way would forget this face from that day on. Looking at the light screen on the television, the immortal Tan sighed after a long moment of silence. "Immortal Jingyang, what are you going to do?" Chapter 829. The mental exhaustion of the female priests was too great, and their aging speed was much faster than that of regular humans. Their lifespans were also shorter. It was easy to calculate that a few or even a dozen female priests would return to the Sea of Stars every year, which meant that a few or even a dozen successors of the female priests would come to the main planet to receive training in the Praying Hall. As such, the populace of the Federation of the Milky Way was not interested in the arrival of the successor of the female priest on the main planet. However, the female priest of the Stargate had a very high status in the Praying Hall, second only to the Unspeakable One and on the same level as the female priests in the other 6 sectors. Her successor was ultimately different. Moreover, the successor of the female priest of the Stargate this year was a poor young girl from the underground neighborhood. The legendary story had spread from the Stargate base to countless planets, which was why so many news media came to interview her, and a few TV stations chose to broadcast it live. However, those TV stations did not expect that the ratings would climb so quickly after the live broadcast began, and then suddenly climb to an unimaginable curve. What was going on? The directors and reporters of the news media were terrifyingly sensitive to viewership ratings, as if they were immortals who had ascended to heaven and earth. Almost at the same time, all the news media received instructions or consciously pointed their cameras at the red-haired female priest, the young man behind her. More than 10 drones descended from the sky as if they were going to take pictures of the young man's face. Only when the battleship issued a low-altitude warning did they reluctantly ascend a little. The young man was wearing a very ordinary blue hoodie. There was no sense of fashion, nor was he wearing any makeup. He didn't even have a hairstyle. His black hair was tied up casually. No one cared about that. Everyone's gaze fell on his face. How should this face be described? Indescribable. The officials at the airport, the reporters, the main preachers of the Praying Hall, and the populace in front of the TV screens could do nothing but exclaim in surprise when they saw Jing Jiu's face, or simply praise it as so beautiful. Don't think that he's not beautiful enough just because he doesn't have a description. In fact, in the face of beauty itself, what else can you do other than praise him? A lotus flower with dew on it? The lonely and beautiful tree outside the lotus pond? The rainbow at the top of the tree? The end of the rainbow pointed to the Southern Cross constellation? No. Any description that was based on reality would have problems, because it would be proven wrong in the end. Those lotuses, trees, rainbows, and stars were all not as beautiful as him. Tenley of Spring Breeze? Don't mention it. Accompanied by Jiang Yuxia and Hua Shi, Zonglizi headed toward the outside of the battleship. The 3 girls were all extremely beautiful, and all of them had different kinds of beauty. However, when they walked together with Jing Jiu, it was hard to see their beauty. The government officials who came to greet him, the reporters of the news media, and the populace in front of the TV sets were all guessing the identity and background of that youth in a blue shirt. Many busybodies had already opened the relevant forums on the Stargate base in an attempt to find out the answer. The main preachers and female caretakers of the praying hall and the College of Priests showed a hint of surprise in their eyes, but they soon calmed down. It seemed that they had learned of Jing Jio's identity and had been reminded of it. The comments on the forum, the discussions in front of the TV, and the female reporter's loss of composure only came to an end when Jing Jio and the others got into the car. The main planet was a very traditional and conservative place. Of course, for safety reasons, flight control was extremely strict. Civilian aircrafts needed to be approved by both the government and the military before they could take off and land in fixed areas and fly according to fixed routes. It was very inconvenient. Most of the populace traveled by high-speed floating trains. Even the high-ranking government officials and the heads of the clans took the floating cars, and the floating cars were not allowed to fly more than 5 meters above the ground. The fleet of carriages that came to greet Zone Lizzie and her group was quite large. In addition to the government, the praying hall, and the College of Priests, even a counselor of the Administrative Committee of the Federation had sent his own car. Unfortunately, his car was left outside. The ridiculous scene of people rushing to pick up the guests didn't occur. It was because the parties had communicated beforehand. Zone Lizzie, Jing Jio, Jiang Yuxia, Hua Shi, and the main preacher got into the luxury car of the praying hall, and the rest of the entourage got into the cars of the government. The reporters of the news media noticed the formation of the fleet of carriages, feeling surprised. In the next moment, they found that the defense was much tighter than usual. A gust of strong wind blew over in the high sky, dispersing some of the floating clouds and exposing the blue sky and a few battleships. Hundreds of elite soldiers in full armor surrounded the scorching sun battleship, blocking the reporters and the populace who came to watch the ceremony. The road leading to the mountains was cleared as soon as possible. A dozen mechas of the latest model landed from the sky, their engines emitting a gloomy glow, flying at a low altitude along with a buzzing sound. As the fleet of carriages advanced into the mountains, the laser cannons were aimed at the periphery. It was evident that the safety valve had been opened. Why was the military so vigilant? Did the scorching sun battleship encounter something on its journey to the main planet? The main preacher in the same carriage as Jing Jio was Tai Yang. He was the one who wanted to preach to Jing Jio at the fire-passing pagoda in Shou-Er City. The attack on the scorching sun battleship is still a top secret. The soldiers on the battleship will be closed for investigation for a while. The military is under a great deal of pressure, but they won't come to harass the master priest and you, said the main preacher Tai Yang in a low voice. Jiang Yuxia had noticed that the female priest of the Stargate and the main preacher treated Jing Jio humbly. She had vaguely guessed what was going on, but she pretended that she didn't know anything about it. Hua Shi was a very intelligent girl, but she was more interested in other matters, like the limousine of the praying hall. She had been observing the surroundings since she got in the limousine. The living room, a few comfortable soft chairs, and the special wine cabinet reminded her of the manor at home. There were so many facilities in the limousine. It was easy to imagine how spacious and luxurious the interior of the limousine was. Zone Lizzie had learned something from the female priest before she left the Stargate, and the main preacher, Tai, told her the rest before they arrived on the main planet. From that day onwards, she spoke much less. Sitting in the limousine, she poured tea for Jing Jio and tidied his collar, as usual, saying nothing. It didn't take long for the motorcade to arrive at the northwest mountains, 700 kilometers away after they left the harbor. The manor was the building of the College of Priests. The praying hall could be seen after climbing over 2 large mountains. It was said that the tightly sealed ruins of the distant ancient civilization were located further north. The main preacher Tai Yang led the preachers in dealing with the miscellaneous affairs. Jing Jio and the 3 girls went to the second floor. As soon as the teapot was placed on the small stove and the water wasn't boiling, a stern interrogative voice could be heard outside the building, as well as the faint sound of the automatic guns being loaded. Jiang Yuxia walked to the window and looked down. She saw a dozen elite soldiers in full armor and an officer standing outside the building. The soldiers escorting the motorcade to the College of Priests didn't dare stop them when they saw the epaulets on the officers' shoulders. Standing on the stone steps expressionlessly, the main preacher Tai Yong and the official of the College of Priests demanded sternly, "What do you want to do?" The officers said, "The military is investigating the case of the Scorching Sun battleship being attacked. Please don't obstruct us." The official of the College of Priests sneered, "You should know that this is the College of Priests." The officer said, "You should also know that this is the Internal Affairs Bureau investigating the case." Hearing the name of the Internal Affairs Bureau, the expression on Jiang Yuxia's face changed slightly, and she looked baffled. Zhong Lizi came before Jing Jiao and asked in a low voice while staring in his eyes, "Should we flee?" Jing Jiao was observing the lines on the iron kettle. Upon hearing this, he uttered in bewilderment. Together, Zhong Lizi said in a lower voice. Chapter 830. The most powerful organization in the Federation of the Milky Way was not the administrative committee or the administrative authorities of the various planets, but the military headquarters. The department with the highest authority in the military was the Internal Affairs Department. According to the regulations of the Federation of the Milky Way and the relevant military regulations, the Internal Affairs Bureau had the right to investigate anyone, including the members of the committee, as long as they had the written authorization from the chief commander of the military headquarters. Over the centuries, the Internal Affairs Division had been extremely cautious in its use of this power. Religious matters. It was the praying hall and all the affairs related to the praying hall. Today, this tradition seemed to be broken. The successor of the Stargate priest had to be investigated and interrogated by the military headquarters as soon as he arrived on the main planet. This was something that the Stargate priest could not accept. The confrontation downstairs continued, and so did the conversation upstairs. Zhong Lizi was very close to Jing Jiao when she said that. It was probably for this reason that she blushed a bit. Jing Jiao could even feel her body temperature. Then he remembered that it should be the heat emitted by the small stove that brewed the tea. Don't overthink things after playing too many games. He knocked her head and said, "Someone will take care of it. Don't worry about it." After saying this, the water in the kettle boiled. After grunting twice, Zhong Lizi took out the tea leaves from her bag and poured them into the teapot. Jing Jiao still felt that the lines on the iron kettle were somewhat familiar, but he was too lazy to think about it. He took out a book and leaned against the chair to start reading. The people from the military's Internal Affairs Department were about to barge in, but as the person in question, he was still so calm. Huashi looked at him with admiration and curiosity on her face. Jiang Yuxiao looked at his face absent-mindedly. That crazy youth under the ginkgo tree at the University of Stargate turned out to be a true genius in cultivation. He was at least in the deep night state at such a young age, and he was also so beautiful. Who was he? Bishop Tai Yong and the officials of the College of Priests failed to stop the officers of the Internal Affairs Department. According to the laws and regulations, they had no reason to stop him. Of course, they didn't really try to stop him. The dozen or so soldiers from the Internal Affairs Division were dressed in light mecha armor, wielding large firepower firearms as they charged in just like that. This kind of physical firearm was more suitable for use in space. On the surface of a planet, it was far less convenient and less powerful than a laser gun. Since they didn't choose laser guns, it was obvious that they knew something. However, those high firepower physical firearms weren't of any use today. They couldn't even be raised because someone was already waiting for them. It was a dark-skinned, middle-aged general who sat on a soft chair on the first floor. Looking at the soldiers who had walked in, he said expressionlessly, "If I don't agree, are you going to shoot me?" Those soldiers retreated very quickly, as if they had never been there. No matter how one looked at it, it was like a farce. The dark-skinned, middle-aged general looked at Jing Jiao, who was walking down the stairs, and raised his eyebrows, as if he was not used to his face. He asked, "Can we go now?" Jing Jiao glanced at Bishop Tai Yong. The bishop whispered, "This is General Ran, the rising sun." Ran as in Ran Handong. In the Federation of the Milky Way, The family name Ran represented more significance, such as a well-known clan with a history of 1,000 years or a truly important figure. Jingjio followed General Ran to the inside of the manor. They came to the underground along the stone steps hidden in the flower bed. The underground passage was large enough to accommodate the floating train like the one in Shower City. The air was dry, devoid of any peculiar smell, and the ventilation system was perfect. The underground fortifications on the main planet are quite advanced, enough to withstand the attack of the nuclear bomb with the highest yield. However, the monsters of the Sea of Dark Matter don't know how to make nuclear bombs. So whom are they defending against? General Ran went on in a mocking tone. As such, the ones to be feared are not those monsters, but the humans themselves. As they came to the underground passage and found nobody but the two of them, General Ran felt much more relaxed. Those guys of the Internal Affairs Bureau came here to tell us that it was them who did it. General Ran took out a cigarette and lit it, motioning to Jing Jio if he wanted one. Jing Jio shook his head and held his breath. He couldn't smell the smoke, and he didn't like the smoke entering his body. The attack on the battleship is a serious matter, so my father can't do anything about it. All I can do is block it for him for a while. As for what will happen next, it depends on the negotiation with that person. Hearing the faint buzzing sound in the deep end of the passage, General Ran took a deep breath, and the whole cigarette was burned out instantly. This underground passage was large enough to accommodate the passage of a floating train, and a floating train had actually arrived. This floating train had only 3 carriages. Besides a few taciturn workers, there were no other passengers. The authority or privilege existed everywhere, but it was more obvious on the main planet. The floating train didn't travel long before it stopped. Jing Jio and General Rand took the self-propelled elevator to the ground, arriving at a place that was obviously a military fortress. Standing outside the door, Ran Handong led Jing Jio to the deep end of the passage. "That's my big brother," she said in a low voice. Jing Jio uttered There was an office in the deep end of the passage. The floor was covered with a wool blanket, and the soft chair was wrapped in genuine leather. One could sense the retro or expensive feeling from all the details. An old man sat behind a desk, his face full of wrinkles and his cheeks freckled. He got up and reached out his hand to Jing Jio. The old man had an ordinary energy, but he couldn't conceal it from Jing Jio. Jing Jio knew that the old man had a profound cultivation state. According to the standard of this world, he was a swordsman in the inherited knight state, a figure in the heavenly arrival state in Chaotian. An important figure in the Federation of the Milky Way should be an important figure to begin with. According to the official records, this old man was 124 years old this year, and he had reached the heavenly arrival state after cultivating for a little more than 100 years. It could be said that there was too much fairy energy in this world. Jing Jio didn't like having physical contact with others. He reached out his hand and let go of the old man's hand after touching it lightly. The old man was Randong Lu, the father of Ran Handong and General Ran. He was the governor of the main planet and the vice chairman of the administrative committee of the Federation of the Milky Way, and he was also the vice commander-in-chief of the military, though the latter was more a nominal title. The two of them sat down in their respective chairs. Ran Donglu sat in a relaxed posture, but he exuded an aura of a leader, his voice calm and forceful. "Is there anything the government can do to help?" Upon hearing this, the expression on Ran Handong's face changed slightly. She was well aware of Jing Jio's temperament during their journey together. She was worried that her father's words would irritate him, so she brought 2 cups of tea to him hastily. Ran Donglu was a little surprised when he saw this scene. It was known that his daughter had always been proud and arrogant. She rarely did things like serving others. It was because of the authority granted by Ran Donglu that Jing Jio could control the Scorching Sun battleship without worrying about getting in touch with the ghost in the deep end of the data network. As such, he spoke straightforwardly. "You've guessed my background?" Ran Donglu motioned for his daughter to leave before he replied, "Yes." "How can I help you?" asked Jing Jio. "There's a mysterious force behind the Federation of the Milky Way, which has been influencing the course of history. Ran Donglu went on. There's an old proverb that goes, when a butterfly flaps its wings, a storm will occur on the other side of the ocean. I'm worried that the butterfly will flap its wings in a frenzy. You've thought too much. Jing Jiu went on without hesitation. It's not an influence. It's because this world has been under their rule. Chapter 831. The organization with the butterfly as the totem had an unimaginable influence in the military, be it the previous two assassinations, the mobilization of the battleships, and the methods they employed against Jian Shilai and Chao Yuan. The officer from the Internal Affairs Division who went to the College of Priests to investigate just now could be said to have declared his position, but it was also a form of deterrence. After a moment of silence, Ran Donglu asked, "Are you from that world?" Jing Jiu asked, "Have you seen others?" Ran Donglu let out an indecipherable smile and said slowly, "Generally." It was true that the current commander-in-chief of the Federation of the Milky Way, General Li, was an ascendant from Chaotian. When Dong was young, she overheard a conversation between her mother and me. She became very curious about that organization, so she began to investigate it in secret. Actually, she didn't know that it wasn't a secret among the upper echelons of the Alliance. Ran Donglu took a look at the closed door and said, "Only when the cocoon breaks can the butterfly emerge. Since there is a cocoon breaker, there will naturally be a butterfly." Jing Jiu asked, "You don't like these cocoon breakers?" Ran Donglu gave a very clear answer. "I belong to the priest sect." Jing Jiu said, "He can kill all of you directly." Even though there were many native swordsmen in the Human Federation of the Milky Way and those in Ran Donglu's cultivation state, they were still no match for the ascendants from Chaotian. He knew very well what level General Li's realm was at. He also knew that there might be even stronger ascenders here, and these people had completely integrated with the interstellar civilization. Ran Donglu gave a clear answer again. The cocoon breakers want to rule this world, so they need that person's help. The female priest on the main planet had the most ancient inheritance in a profound cultivation state. She was respected and worshipped by millions of believers in the Federation of the Milky Way. Nobody dared to peek at her name. They only called her that one. Jing Jiu then asked, "Why me?" If the local swordsmen of the Federation of the Milky Way didn't like the ascendants, why did they choose him? Why would she trust him? Before God left, he said that a new God would come here. Ran Donglu said, "Since the female priest of the Stargate thinks it might be you, why don't I give it a try? Of course, the main reason is that you are very strong." "Benefits?" Jing Jiu asked. Ran Donglu asked, "Why did you refuse their inspection?" Jing Jiu said, "That makes sense." Ran Donglu said, "The authority is my goodwill, and the deal is for the future because that person hasn't seen you yet. If she thinks it's not you, we can only establish a personal friendship, and my daughter will become your most loyal servant." Thinking of Ran Hondong's computer skills, Jing Jiu didn't object. "When will we meet?" he asked. "Even if you are a candidate god, you can only wait for that god summon." Ran Donglu got up and said, "Don't stay in the College of Priests anymore. You have killed so many of their people. There will be revenge." Jing Jiu said, "I won't. Those cocoon breakers, or rather, the previous generation of ascenders, would not seek revenge on him for the deaths on that warship. In the eyes of those people, the soldiers of the Federation of the Milky Way were no different from ants. As for other forms of revenge, he didn't care." After returning to the building of the College of Priests, Ran Handong didn't leave. Instead, she began to tidy up the rooms on the first floor. "What is going on?" asked Zhong Lizi. "From today onwards, she will be my secretary. You can leave the chores to her." Jing Jiu lay down on the chair, a tired expression on his face. "Are you sure you are all right?" she asked worriedly. After leaving the Inhai Nebula, it took the Scorching Sun battleship 7 days to arrive on the main planet. Jing Jiu spent most of the time sleeping during the 7 days. It was a rare thing to do. "I'm all right," said Jing Jiu. Zhong Lizi asked while staring in his eyes, "Why did you take off the hat then?" Jing Jiu said while rubbing his earlobe, "It's a bit stuffy." Seeing the movement of his fingers, Zhong Lizi remarked. You've never done this before. Back in the apartment in the underground neighborhood, she had noticed that his earlobe was damaged. It didn't look like it was damaged by a sharp object, but more like a small piece of hard rock falling off from a stone statue. She had asked him if he felt any pain. He said he didn't feel anything. If he didn't feel anything, why did he touch it so often in the last few days? The water in the iron kettle was boiling. A faint fragrance came out soon after a few tea leaves were tossed into the kettle. Zhong Lizi was fully aware that Jingjio was drinking the tea for pleasure. He didn't care about the strength of the tea, but he preferred a lighter one because it looked better. After taking a sip of the tea, Jingjio found that the tea tasted a bit smoother, either because her cooking skill had improved or for some other reason. Jingjio noticed that the patterns on the iron kettle were somewhat familiar. After some thought, he remembered that he had drawn up the patterns for the female priest to see in the praying hall of the Stargate. My teacher has memorized the patterns and asked the people on the main planet to make the iron kettle, but I'm not sure if the quality of the iron is the same. Zhong Lizi called the female priest of the Stargate her teacher. Seeing that Jingjio had finally noticed the iron kettle and the small stove, she let out a delighted laugh. Thinking of the female priest who believed that he was the new god, Jingjio asked her, "Do you know?" Upon hearing this question, Zhong Lizi grew nervous. After a moment of hesitation, she said softly, "My teacher said, 'You're the new god,' and asked me to serve you well. I'm not, so you don't have to be so cautious. But don't think that I'll elope with you either." Jingjio rubbed her head and said, "Just do it like before." His red hair became messy, looking like a naughty poem or like the thoughtless sword with its marks in a messy way. What they had done before was what they had done in the underground apartment, the Stargate Hotel, and the Shinma Peak. Later, Jingjio had been waiting in this building for the summoning of that person. Time passed slowly. It seemed that a long time had elapsed, but in fact, only 3 days had passed. The main preacher Tai Yong and the higher-ups of the College of Priests were all aware of the secret, so they served him very diligently. All sorts of information came to Ran Handong and was then passed on to Jingjio. The military was investigating the attack on the Scorching Sun battleship. The captain of the battleship was brought to the Internal Affairs Department, and the officers and soldiers on the battleship were transferred to a base. The praying hall remained silent, and the Rand family didn't say anything either. In the early morning of the 4th day, it rained. The mountains around the College of Priests were covered in a thick fog. Standing on the deck and looking at the thick fog, Jingjio thought of Cloudy Town outside Aoyama. He suddenly said, "I'd like to go out for a walk." Ran Handong stood by his side like a secretary. She intended to object reflexively when she heard this, but then she remembered her status and said, "I'll arrange it right away." "No need for that." Jingjio turned around and placed the teacup in her hand, heading for the outside of the building. The so-called arrangement was to inform the praying hall and the Rand family, and then arrange for the relevant personnel to ensure his travel. He didn't need it. The floating train brought Jingjio and Ran Handong away from the College of Priests and arrived in the special administrative district of the capital. Chapter 832. Capital City was indeed the most important city in the Federation of the Milky Way. Though its name was only one character different from Shoer City, its construction was much more advanced. The fog flowing out from the mountains came to the outskirts of Capital City along the Sea Barricade Dam, and then flowed into the city along the streets and alleys. It was a marvelous scene. Countless tall buildings could be vaguely seen amid the fog. The elevators leading to the space became dozens of thin lines in the distance, looking like the strings of a zither. The control over the space on the main planet was very strict, which had something to do with the space elevators that could be seen everywhere. Otherwise, the people would be able to see the spaceships falling into the spiderweb like insects every day. Jingjio and Ran Handong strolled casually on the street, looking like regular tourists. Many tourists came to this city from other states, other cities, and colonized planets every day for sightseeing. Ran Handong introduced the sceneries and culture of Capital City and the famous buildings in a low voice, thinking that everything would be fine as long as he didn't take off his hat. People were all the same. Jingjiu was more interested in the different sceneries. Unfortunately, the fog was too thick. He couldn't see them clearly, even though the vague sceneries on the alien planets had a unique charm. It seemed that the fog had sensed his thought. The fog in Capital City had vanished instantly by noon. The blazing light shone down from the almost transparent sky, illuminating everything. There was a large sun in the sky with many specks of light. There was a planet in the west with visible rings of the planet. He could actually see the stars and even a planet during the day. This was a scene that couldn't be seen in Chaotian or on the Stargate base. Jingjiu uttered satisfactorily. In addition to the stars, many space stations could be seen in the sky, reflecting the light of the permanent star, which was even brighter than the real stars. The main planet was protected by 3 layers of protective shields. Otherwise, the humans in the Federation of the Milky Way couldn't survive for a long time under the ultraviolet rays and cosmic rays, even though most of them could cultivate after having their genes modified. The largest space station in the middle of the ring is the Science Institute of the Federation. The number 3 laboratory of the military is in the distance, and the vacation base of a clan is in the distance. Ran Handong explained earnestly while pointing to the sky like a competent tour guide. His line of sight followed the tip of Ran Handong's finger and returned to the ground, fixing on a building at the end of the street. The building was very eye-catching and extremely huge. It looked like a mountain, but it also looked like a space battleship had landed on the ground. Ran Handong said, "That is the building of the military headquarters. In fact, it is a battleship which can take off at any moment. It will only take 20 minutes to do so during the war." Jingjiu looked at the huge building in silence for a while before asking, "General Li works there?" "He has a large office at the top of the building. However, he often goes on expeditions with the fleet, and his whereabouts are strictly confidential. No one can be sure when he is here." Ran Handong added, "My father also has an office here, but it hasn't been used for many years." Jingjiu knew that she had guessed his meaning and asked, "What are the chances that he is here now?" Staring into his eyes, Ran Handong asked, "Are you sure you want to know?" Jingjiu uttered, Ran Handong led him to a tea house by the street and sat down. She asked for 2 cups of water and turned on the light screen in her bracelet to collect the information. She was indeed one of the most skillful cloud ghosts in the Federation of the Milky Way. It didn't take long for her to collect enough information. There's a special parking area in the underground garage of the building of the military headquarters. It was because this building was a battleship to begin with, so every vehicle that entered the building would be calculated. According to the weight analysis, all 7 vehicles of General Li were here. The dining hall of the military headquarters had been ordered to purchase a batch of white truffles 10 days ago, but 1/3 of the white truffles had been consumed the day before yesterday. It was General Li's favorite ingredient in spring. For this reason, he had traveled back and forth between a few colonized planets for 2 standard years in order to stay in spring. In addition, there was more information. In the end, Ran Handong came up with a conclusion. The probability of him being here is 72%. Jingjiu didn't miss his wicked disciple Gu Qing that much, but he corrected her. It should be 43%. Though Ran Handong didn't intend to argue with him, she couldn't help but say, "He knows you're on the main planet, so he will come back for sure." "He was on Lindang 8 days ago," said Jingjiu. Ran Handong was taken aback. "Is he on the mineral planet where the earthquake occurred?" The mineral planet Lindang was not famous in the Federation of the Milky Way. If she hadn't seen the news that Jingjiu had been concerned about, she wouldn't have known where it was. Jingjiu said, "Based on the distance between the mineral planet and here, it will be hard for him to come back even if he jumps back and forth. He won't make it too hard for himself." This statement contained a great deal of information and someone's confidence. Unfortunately, Ran Handong didn't notice it. In this regard, she was far inferior to Gu Qing. "Well, even if the probability is 42%, Ran Handong asked while staring into his eyes, "Are you going to see him?" Looking at the building, Jingjiu said, "The reason I came to the main planet was to see him." After a moment of silence, Ran Handong picked up the cup of water in front of her and drank it up. She took off the sunglasses from her chest and handed them to Jing Jiao. Then she got up and headed for the building of the military headquarters. Jing Jiao took the sunglasses and put them on. He pulled down the hat and followed her. The hall on the first floor of the building of the military headquarters was empty. Most of the officers would enter the building from the underground garage or take the flying device to the upper deck of the battleship. As Ran Handong led Jing Jiao in the hall, she suddenly disliked her leather boots. It was not because the calf leather from the grazing planet was uncomfortable, but because the sound of the heels stepping on the floor was too loud. As the daughter of Ran Donglu, she was famous in the military because of her outstanding talent and cultivation and her good looks, and she had many pursuers. She had been indifferent to this before, but she felt it rather bad that day. In just a short distance of a few hundred meters, she was seen by the 4 generals, who engaged in a cordial conversation with her. As for greetings, there was no end to them. Along with 2 beeps, the elevator moved upward. Looking at the reflection of Jing Jiao on the door, she asked expressionlessly, "Am I crazy?" "No," replied Jing Jiao. Ran Handong pressed. "If I weren't crazy, why would I bring you to the building of the military headquarters and take you to see General Li?" "I have an appointment with him," said Jing Jiao. Upon hearing this, Ran Handong couldn't help but turn her head to glance at him, wondering if what he said was true. If he had a secret connection with General Li, why did he tell her? If he were in the office, what would you do when you saw him? "I'll tell you when I see him." It was deathly quiet in the elevator. It didn't take long before the door of the elevator opened slowly. The 2 of them walked in. The passage and all the installations on the top floor of the battleship were made of a special alloy, which was smooth and hard. Even the green plants in the corners of the walls were fake. This was a place devoid of life energy, and no magic method could be employed here. There was an office desk in front of the passage, also made of metal. A middle-aged female officer stood up and said to Ran Handong with a faint smile, "Hello, Major Ran." "Hello, Lieutenant Colonel Chun," said Ran Handong calmly. General Li was the chief commander of the military headquarters and the supreme leader of the humans. His secretary was a lieutenant colonel, which was a very reasonable thing. The female Lieutenant Colonel Chun looked at Jing Jiao. As Ran Handong was about to say something, Lieutenant Colonel Chun said with a faint smile, "Hello, Mr. Jing. Please come with me." The second season of The Coming Night was broadcasted yesterday. Everybody, come with me to have a look. The Tencent Video is broadcasting it exclusively. Alas, there's so many customers these days. Chapter 833. The building of the military headquarters was indeed a battleship. General Li's office was located at the highest point of the battleship, but it was not the most important place on the battleship. The commanding office of the captain was usually located at the head of the battleship. There was also a large office at the head of the military headquarters. Different from General Li's office, it was decorated with art pieces and all kinds of flowers and green trees. It looked like a garden, devoid of any trace of metal. A brook was flowing slowly in the deep end of the garden-like hall. There was a small pavilion at the source of the brook, in which a zither was placed. The zither was played by an elegant young master wearing a white robe. It was really unimaginable to see such a scene in the building of the military headquarters. That young master was very handsome, with a pair of eyes and brows. His slightly puckered lips were a bit thin, but they didn't look mean. Instead, he looked quite charming. His fingers were as long and slender as scallions, and they fell on the strings of the zither. It seemed that he was born to be an artist. It was quiet in the courtyard. A few subordinates in military uniforms stood by the brook and looked at the scene in the pavilion. They were so nervous that they didn't dare speak, for fear that they would disturb the young master's interest in playing the zither. However, the zither didn't make any sound in the end. The young master sighed and pulled back his fingers, saying, 3 battleships were sent there. One was cut by a broadsword, and the other was pierced by a sword. It doesn't sound like a battleship at all. It's more like a pig. Those soldiers were all generals with different numbers of golden stars on their shoulder badges. They didn't dare retort after being reprimanded by the young master. Has the remote monitoring been repaired? The young master took out a soft handkerchief and wiped his hands carefully. Then he nodded satisfactorily while comparing the handkerchief with the sunlight outside the window. A general came forward hastily and played the video on the light screen. The seventh warped passageway of the Einhai Nebula was far away from the main planet, and the battleship had been severely damaged. As a result, the restored video was not three-dimensional and a bit blurry, but it was enough to see many things clearly. For instance, the scene in which dozens of sword lights passed through the window and the middle-aged man's body. I didn't expect Chi Song to have such a pitiful day. Looking at the human figures condensed by the sword lights, the young master said with raised eyebrows, "This guy is indeed very strong." Those who might have met him in the Mingxing community of the Stargate base have all been arrested. The investigation by the Twirling Rain Company has also started, but there are no clues for the time being. The general asked, "Should we stop the game first?" That young master ignored them and suddenly asked, "Who do you think is better looking, him or me?" This was a deadly question. The courtyard was silent. "How boring." The young master looked at the light screen and said, "Just like this face, beautiful as it is a porcelain doll." The scene changed from remote surveillance to the spaceport from a few days ago. The blue-clothed youth stood at the exit of the battleship. He lifted his hat and revealed his face. He's using this face in exchange for a good reputation in the Alliance. He thinks that he'll be safer this way and that he won't be able to touch you as he pleases. This guy must have read some historical novels before. He's just a little too naive. The young master said, "But he's one of us. Just ignore him and let him be immersed in his own imagination." The generals were very surprised, thinking that this cocoon breaker had dared to resist the inspection and kill an important figure in the organization. Logically speaking, he should be dead. Why would the young master let him go? This was not in line with his temperament. And what did he mean by one of us? As for the investigation, there's nothing to investigate. The young master lifted both of his legs and placed them on the ancient zither. The strings of his zither gave off a buzzing sound. The generals were startled and stood up straight hastily. It's just that the priest sect is up to no good again. History always repeats itself like this. It's really boring. Let's kill all those people we've captured. The young master suddenly heard something and got up, heading toward the outside of the courtyard. There were a few dining rooms and a tea house on each floor of the building of the military headquarters. Ran Handong was waiting in the tea house. Many military officers sat not too far from her, trying to talk to her or just look at her. A white cloud suddenly drifted over from the other side of the passageway. It was a young master in a white robe. The military officers got up hastily and left as quickly as they could. Seeing the newcomer, the expression on Ran Handong's face changed slightly. Shin Yunmai. His talent in martial arts was the best in the world. His knowledge was the best. His beauty was the best. So was his narcissism. When he was 16, he was specially recruited by the Alliance Academy of Science to join the Frontier Research Corps Group. However, he only stayed for half a year before he felt bored and went to the First Fleet. When he was 20, the First Fleet encountered an undercurrent outbreak when they were carrying out a Star Chain mission. They were almost wiped out, and it was thanks to him that most of their strength was preserved. At the age of 22, he led the First Fleet to complete the closed-loop Star Chain. He made a special contribution and was awarded the Galaxy Medal. During that war, he was seriously wounded and had to recuperate on planet Tianpu for 10 months. During that time, he was bored and tried to convert the nuclear power furnace into superparticles, and he made a breakthrough. With this success, he won the Supernova Prize without a doubt. At that time, he was only 23. He was 25 years old now, and he was the highest advisor in the military headquarters of the Federation of the Milky Way, having the authority of a general. Many people speculated that he might be General Li's younger brother who had been lost to the outside world. The reason why he wasn't an illegitimate son was because he didn't respect General Li at all. Shen Yunmai asked Ran Handong with a faint smile, "Are you waiting for someone?" "Yes," said Ran Handong. Shin Yunmai suddenly reached out his hand and pinched her face. Ran Handong was a swordsman of the young generation in the military, and she was in the Star State, but she couldn't evade his hand. Shin Yunmai rubbed her face slowly, as if he were rubbing a ball of mud or a toy, a faint smile on his handsome face. After your father dies, I'll come and rape you. You must remember to resist me then. Combined with what he had just said, the scene looked rather disgusting. All of a sudden, his fingers grew stiff, and then they slowly left Ran Handong's face one by one. He turned around and looked at the upper deck of the battleship. There was an office there. There was a window in the office. A youth in blue clothing stood by the window. The youth looked at him expressionlessly. Jing Jiao followed Colonel Chun into the long corridor. The long metal corridor seemed to be a single entity, devoid of any gaps or welding spots. However, he saw the generator of the gravitational field behind the metal walls, the high-energy laser grates, and some weapon systems he had never seen before. It would be troublesome for him to barge into this place. "Did you know I would come?" asked Jing Jiao. As soon as Jing Jiao and Ran Handong walked out of the elevator, Colonel Chin recognized Jing Jiao and invited him. It was obvious that he had come prepared. Colonel Chin said, "The general is very busy every day. He wasn't sure if he could come back to the main planet to meet you, so he gave us some instructions." There was an ordinary office at the end of the long corridor, but it was very large. The bookshelves on 3 sides of the wall were full of books. Paper books were not rare in the Federation of the Milky Way, but it was inappropriate for a human leader to use so many paper books to decorate the office. It meant that these books were meant for reading. "I'd like to take a look around," said Jing Jiao. Colonel Chun said, "It's the general's intention." Jing Jiao walked to the front of the bookshelf and started reading. He read the books at a fast speed, and he didn't stop reading the covers of the books at all. It didn't take long for him to finish reading the entire wall and make a judgment. These books didn't contain the combination of the cultivation methods and the technology of the Milky Way, nor did they contain the analysis of gene modification and cultivation. They were merely some common history books and a great deal of information on the internet. However, Jing Jiao was very familiar with the arrangement of these books. It was the arrangement of books on Shirua Peak. There was also a book on a desk. Jing Jiao walked over to take a look and found it was The Path Toward Heaven. The pages of the book were flipped to the chapter titled The Wind Blows Over Aoyama. It was not an ordinary paperweight that was pressed on the page, but an ornament made of 2 round blue gems. The 2 gems could be described as 2 circles, growing and multiplying endlessly. They could also be described as limitless, and it looked like the wings of a butterfly. "Don't investigate me," Jing Jiao suddenly said. General Li shouldn't investigate him, but it wasn't guaranteed that this organization wouldn't investigate him. He wasn't afraid of being investigated, but the thousands of officers and soldiers on that battleship and those on the Stargate shouldn't be investigated as well. If he could meet General Li that day, nobody could tell what would happen next. Since he didn't meet General Li, Jing Jiao took care of this matter. Colonel Chun didn't expect Jing Jiao to make such a request. After a moment of silence, he said, "This is not my job. I don't have the right to do it." "Who has the right to do it?" asked Jing Jiao. It was then that he heard a noise coming from downstairs. Jing Jiao came to the window and saw the scene. Ran Handong's face was pinched by someone. Chapter 834. A youth in a blue hoodie stood by the window on the top floor, and a young master in a white robe stood by the railing on the lower floor. The 2 of them met each other's gazes in the spacious building of the military headquarters at a distance of several hundred meters. No wind whipped up, no sword sound, and no sparks could be seen, but the content of their gazes was immeasurable. If it were another story or a classic scene, the 2 of them would pull back their gazes in the next moment and turn around to leave. They wouldn't meet again until they had gone through many storms and many years. They would recall the first time their gazes met many years later, and then a thrilling fight would ensue, pushing the plot to a climax. It was too troublesome and time-consuming for Jing Jiao. He disappeared from the window and reappeared in front of Shin Yunmai. A gust of wind blew up this time. The hood of the blue hoodie was lifted up, exposing his face. Shin Yunmai's finger had just left Ran Hondong's cheek, the tip of his finger still feeling a bit warm. Looking at Jing Jio's face, Shin Yunmai was a bit absent-minded. Then, he let out a wry smile and said, "Isn't it a bit early for us to meet?" Jing Jio didn't pay attention to the implied meaning in his statement. "Do you have a right of access?" he asked. He had requested the release of the soldiers on the battleship in General Li's office earlier, but Major Chen said that he didn't have the right to do so. Did Shin Yunmai have a right of access? Shin Yunmai said to Jing Jio with a faint smile, "I do." This most outstanding young master in the Federation of the Milky Way was indeed very good-looking. His casual smile was charming enough to enchant the masses. "Are you a descendant of the Ascendants?" asked Jing Jio after shooting him a few glances. What he meant was that this person was a descendant of the Ascendants from Chaotian and a human in the Federation of the Milky Way. Shin Yunmai said, "This is not the fairy world, nor is it the upper world. You have to change your habits. You're the cocoon breakers." Jing Jio didn't care about this, and he had no intention of acknowledging him as a fellow from the same hometown. "The right of access?" he pressed. Shin Yunmai ascertained the purpose of his visit. "You're indeed different from them," he said while staring into Jing Jio's eyes. Ran Handong had just come back to her senses. She took a glance at Jing Jio and backed away silently. Shin Yunmai continued, "It's impossible to let them go. Those who know your secret and are secret must die. Those on the battleship are already dead." Jing Jio said, "No, if they die, you will die too." This was not a threat or intimidation, but an objective, calm, and powerful statement. "Do you know who I am?" Shin Yunmai raised his eyebrows and said in a different tone, "Doesn't this sound like what the villains usually say?" These words are indeed powerless and will only invite ridicule. "But I am very powerful." Jing Jio said, "I think I know who you are." Shin Yunmai raised his hand to stroke his waterfall-like black hair and said with a bored tone, "Since you know who I am, how dare you touch me? Even if you're different from those cocoon breakers and have some inexplicable courage, if you suddenly want to touch me, how can you touch me?" Without waiting for Jing Jio to speak, he sighed and continued, "Don't you think this kind of life is boring? One would feel lonely when he was invincible, and loneliness would be like the snow." Though what he said sounded pretentious, it was true that he would feel bored or lonely if he had stood on the peak top for many years. "It's all right," replied Jing Jio after thinking of his two lives. He didn't feel bored or lonely. It was just that he felt annoyed sometimes. He welcomed anything that could save him some trouble. Shin Yunmai displayed an amused expression as he said, "The cocoon breakers are all proud. I've seen them before, but they are not as proud as you." He thought of how to describe Jing Jio's temperament. "Natural?" he asked uncertainly. "They have been defeated," said Jing Jio. "But I haven't." Shin Yunmai said sentimentally, "I've figured it out. The temperament you exude is not the natural arrogance. It's something that can make people feel unhappy." "Have you finished talking?" asked Jing Jio. "I hope what you said is true. Otherwise, I'll have a feeling of emptiness again. In order to make you take it more seriously, let's do it this way." Shin Yunmai went on while staring at Jing Jio. "If you lose, Zhong Lizi, Jiang Yuxia, and the little girl of the Hua clan will all die." A moment ago, he had pinched Ran Hondong's face and said that he would rape her if her father died. Of course, he didn't want to rape her, just like how he didn't want to kill the successor of the female priest of the Stargate. These were merely the bargaining chips he tossed on the table. Life was a boring game for him. Jing Jio was not irritated by this remark. His countenance was still as calm as ever, but he had raised his right hand and pointed it forward. This movement seemed simple and casual, but it was actually dreadful. It was because it was too fast. Many people in the building of the military headquarters were paying attention to the commotion, and many surveillance devices were aimed in this direction. But nobody could see Jing Jio's movement clearly, and none of the surveillance devices could capture his movement. Jing Jio's long and slender finger was like the sharpest sword, cutting through hundreds of thousands of air molecules and creating countless tiny turbulence due to the friction. The turbulence had no time to emit a glow, which looked like the threads of glass being melted by the high temperature. Shen Yunmai was the only one who could see Jing Jiu's movement and the finger clearly, and he was the only one who could do something about it. Jing Jiu lifted his right hand as his sleeve tousled slightly, but the first wrinkle had just appeared on the edge of the sleeve before it actually fluttered. His finger landed on Jing Jiu's shoulder. It was still a bit too slow. Jing Jiu's finger landed on the center of Jing Jiu's eyebrows. Time seemed to have stopped at this moment. To put it more precisely, time began to move forward at a normal speed from this moment on. The scene was witnessed by everybody, and all the surveillance devices were absolutely still. They looked like the shooters who aimed their guns at their opponents at a very short distance in the retro movies. Those two fingers were like two extremely powerful guns. The two of them seemed to have pulled the triggers at the same time. A loud bang resounded. His white robe fluttered like a flag in a mess. Shen Yunmai whizzed through the air like a stone and flew backward. The sounds of violent collisions kept ringing out. Several solid walls were broken one after another, raising a cloud of smoke and dust. The people who witnessed the scene were so shocked that they even forgot to exclaim. Their faces were full of incredulity. A straight passageway appeared in the building of the military headquarters. The smoke and dust gradually settled, revealing a figure. Shen Yunmai's white robe was slightly torn, and his eyes were a bit perplexed. But he soon calmed down. Looking at the blue figure in the distance, he tilted his head slightly and suddenly smiled. It seemed that he found the scene quite interesting. As he did so, a drop of blood seeped out from the center of his eyebrows. The drop of blood emitted a faint golden glow when it was illuminated by the sunlight. Jing Jiu took a look at his left shoulder and found a tiny cut on his blue robe. He lifted his head and looked into the distance, thinking it was quite interesting. Having thought of this, he came up to Shen Yunmai and pointed his finger at the center of his eyebrows again. Chapter 835. The finger Jing Jiu extended was not the sword style of the Aoyama sect, nor was it any magic method in Chaotian. It was a simple swing of the sword. It was because he was fully aware that the fight would be more troublesome if he used the sword style of the Aoyama sect. He was the kind of person who disliked trouble the most, and preferred to accomplish something simply. Simplicity didn't mean that the sword was not powerful enough. It meant that the sword was focused and pure. It was similar to the sword wielded by the child of the No Mercy sect who killed Emperor Shao amid the falling leaves. It turned out that Jing Jiu's choice was as correct and perfect as the choice he had made in every fight over the past 1,000 years. Shen Yunmai had no other way to deal with his simple sword, so he had no choice but to fight it head-on. Fighting head-on was a contest of toughness. No matter whether it was in Chaotian or the Federation of the Milky Way, nothing was harder than the all-in-one sword. As expected, Shen Yunmai was defeated in this fight. What Jing Jiu didn't expect was that his simple and focused sword couldn't kill his opponent. The sword light had pierced through Shen Yunmai's body, but couldn't penetrate his body. Shen Yunmai was only slightly wounded. Let's try another sword. The sword light flashed faintly. His finger dropped down. An extremely clear sword chime rang out. This time his finger didn't land on the center of Shen Yunmai's eyebrows. It was unclear when Shen Yunmai raised his right hand to shield his eyes. The sword sound was the sound when Jing Jiu's finger met his palm. Jing Jiu's finger sensed the countless sword wills encircling it and sensed a familiar energy, but it also encountered a great deal of resistance. The sword wills coming out from Shen Yunmai's finger were like countless threads woven into the softest and most tenacious cloth in the world, blocking his most focused sword strike like a swamp. It was the inherited heaven sword formation on Tianguang Peak. Jing Jiu had anticipated this. His expression didn't change, and his finger kept thrusting forward. The crisp sword sound broke out like a rainstorm, echoing in the whole building of the military headquarters. The desks were smashed to pieces instantly, and many deep marks appeared on the hard alloy walls. Countless sword lights passed through the gaps between Shen Yunmai's fingers and fell into his eyes. His face was a little pale, and his eyes were still indifferent, but his expression had become much more cautious. His white sleeves fluttered again, and snow fell out of nowhere on the ruins. Amidst several deep buzzing sounds, an unimaginable chill appeared, piercing through the snowflakes and heading towards Jingjio. This was the Snowstream sword art, but it was more powerful and had a lower temperature than the Snowstream sword art of Shangda Peak. What he used was not a sword, but a cryogenic ray. The source of his snowflakes was a cryogenic ray gun on the west side of the military building. Jingjio did not turn around, nor did he dodge. Instead, he waved his left hand. Dozens of sword lights blossomed like plum blossoms, blocking the low-temperature ray gun before twisting upwards and destroying it. The sword light drifted down and left a plum blossom mark on Shun Yunmai's left hand. The Seven Apricot sword art of Shilai Peak was the perfect counter to the Snowstream sword art of Shangda Peak. The expression on Shun Yunmai's face did not change. He clenched his left hand. Thunder rumbled and dispersed the sword will of Seven Apricot. Dozens of self-propelled laser cannons arrived in the sky. Accompanied by the rumbling thunder, they launched another attack. Thunders in all directions was the main sword of Bihu Peak. Countless sword lights lit up in the depths of the military building. No one knew what this battle meant. This should be the most exciting fight of swordsmanship since the founding of Aoyama sect tens of thousands of years ago. Countless ancient or unorthodox swordsmanship of various peaks were competing against each other in the smoke and dust. They were mutually reinforcing and restraining each other. His white robe fluttered in the smoke and dust. Shun Yunmai reached out his hand and fired a laser cannon. As far as the eye could see, dozens of self-propelled mechas were advancing one after another. Jingjio waved his left hand, and the snow stream came out. With a tremble of his fingertips, plum blossoms blossomed. Each had his own way of doing things, and each had his own style. Innumerable sword lights gradually formed a sword formation. The eye of the formation was actually the generator of the gravitational field inside the battleship. It had to be said that Shun Yunmai's swordsmanship was extraordinarily profound, and his insight was also excellent. He was able to identify Jingjio's weakness in such a short time. If he could use the inherited heaven sword formation strengthened by the gravitational field to trap Jingjio, what would happen next? It was then that Shun Yunmai's left hand suddenly couldn't move. It was unclear when Jingjio's left hand had dropped down. Countless thin sword wills were between his fingers, locking Shun Yunmai's hand. What sword style is this? Shun Yunmai displayed a baffled expression in his eyes. He was quite familiar with the inherited heaven sword of Tianguang Peak, Shanghai Peak, and Shirua Peak. Yet, he had never seen such a sword style. It's the endless sword style of Qingrong Peak, said Jingjio. Shun Yunmai recalled the book titled The Path Toward Heaven and exclaimed angrily, "Is this the advantage of being a late learner?" Qingrong Peak appeared very late. It happened after the civil strife in Aoyama and the massacre of Machin Peak. The Grandmasters hadn't left Chaotian at the time. Shun Yunmai and Jingjio had learned all the sword styles of the peaks in Aoyama, but he had no idea what the endless sword style was. Jingjio said, while looking at him, "Don't use those dirty tricks. You should be more powerful than you are now." "But it's boring," said Shun Yunmai. Jingjio said, "It's more boring if you're dead." "Why don't you go to hell then?" demanded Shun Yunmai. No sooner had he said this than he flipped his right hand and grabbed Jingjio's wrist with countless sword lights. This sword style should be derived from the old sword style of Machin Peak. He continued while staring into Jingjio's eyes. "If so, it's very easy to learn." Countless sword lights came out from the hands of the two of them, looking like the light rays of a permanent star. The alarm rang out in the building of the military headquarters. Countless weapon platforms started scanning, but they couldn't find the target. The smoke and dust rose up, gradually obscuring the view, but the sword lights coming out from the inside were still visible. The sword lights cut everything in the surroundings into pieces like a lotus flower. The sword lights that looked like the nebula ignored the sturdy alloy walls and all the shielding doors and dropped down from the top of the building of the military headquarters, eliciting many surprised screams. The laser beams summoned by Shun Yunmai shot out once in a while to increase the power of the sword lights. The laboratory is over there. Inform them immediately. It's too late. Along with countless surprise screams, dozens of swordsmen of the military in their battle armors rushed over there. The experimental subjects in the laboratory of the military headquarters were the monsters of the sea of dark matter. If they were allowed to escape, they would cause a great disturbance on the main planet. Crack! The front door of the laboratory was destroyed, and a monster in the shape of a black cloud and fog, exuding a destructive and cold intent, rushed out from inside. Yet, it was sliced into the tiniest particles by the sword light before it could cause any disturbance, dispersing like the smoke and dust. Was this the strength of the rumored inherited night state? Seeing the scene, everybody was stunned speechless. The young Master Shun was indeed the most talented swordsman in the Federation of the Milky Way. Boom! The structure of the battleship on the west side of the building of the military headquarters couldn't withstand the fight between the swordsmen any longer and collapsed. The smoke and dust rose up into the sky, as if they were about to enter the bright sky. A few battleships in the space had their main laser cannons activated, ready to fire at any moment. Hundreds of battleships flew into the sky and aimed their most powerful weapons at the patch of smoke and dust. As the smoke and dust settled, two figures appeared. Shin Yunmai sat in the ruins, raising his hands high. He didn't surrender. It was because his hands were grabbed by Jingjio and he couldn't let go of them. The flesh and blood on his arms had collapsed, exposing the complicated metal lines. It seemed that his arms had been modified thoroughly. The blood flowed forward from the metal lines and dripped into the dust, making pitter-patter sounds. Chapter 836. The sound of police sirens could be vaguely heard in the distant streets of the capital, but none of the flying devices of the police dared come close. The remaining smoke came out from the gap in the building of the military headquarters. Once in a while, the broken pieces of the alloy door would fall down from the high place, making thudding sounds as the broken stones splashed up. Hundreds of armored mechas hovered in the sky, looking like a dense flock of birds. The deep buzzing of the engines was similar to the sound of the birds flapping their wings. The gun barrels and the launchers were all aimed at Jingjio in the thin smoke. No matter how the mechas moved, they didn't deviate from the target. They could fire an unimaginable firepower at any time. A few battleships outside the atmosphere had already locked onto Jingjio. The biggest threat came from the battleship on the ground, which was the building of the military headquarters. The building of the military headquarters was severely damaged, and the weapon system inside hadn't been put to good use yet. The device to generate the gravitational field was ready to isolate the area at any time. By then, the main laser gun of the battleship, the armored mechas, and the automatic platform would be unnecessary. All they needed was the nuclear bomb inside the gravitational field to kill Jingjio at a close distance. However, under the current circumstances, Shun Yunmai had no choice but to die together with Jingjio. Nobody could afford such a price. All they could do was hope that Jingjio would surrender voluntarily. Jingjio didn't pay any attention to the mechas in the sky and the heavy weapons that could threaten him. He looked at the young man in front of him in silence. A few battleships and countless soldiers of the Federation of the Milky Way were waiting for his answer. Jingjio was waiting for the answer. After coughing twice, Shin Yunmai said, "Everybody will be released. I won't cause you any trouble in the next 60 days. I won't cause you any trouble." This was a sincere condition, and he didn't leave any loopholes in his words. Most importantly, he didn't show any hesitation, as if he had this idea from the very beginning. The badly damaged building of the military headquarters had a different opinion. Jingjio let go of Shun Yunmai's hands and turned around, heading toward the outside of the building. The heavily armored soldiers stepped aside reflexively to let him pass. Ran Handong appeared out of nowhere and handed a white wet towel to Jing Jiao. Jing Jiao took the wet towel and wiped the blood off his hands. Although he didn't need it, he was still very satisfied with her performance. Suddenly encountering such a major incident, this young female officer, other than turning a little pale, was still calm and did not forget her job. He thought that it was not important whether Gu Qing could ascend or not. There was no sound in the military building. It was as quiet as a tomb. Countless gazes and at least hundreds of lasers locked onto the two men as they disappeared into the distant corner of the street. Only then did they retract their gazes and look at the ruins. Shen Yunmai was still sitting on the ground with his hands raised like a soldier surrendering. But no one dared to show the slightest bit of disrespect, nor did they show any contemptuous or mocking expressions. As far as the soldiers of the Federation of the Milky Way were concerned, he was like a real god. Unexpectedly, he had fallen into the dust that day. No one could accept this fact. At this moment, everyone's mood was filled with frustration and unexplainable anger. Everybody knew Ran Handong, but who was that youth in the blue hoodie? Some of them recalled the live broadcast of the harbor a few days ago. Shen Yunmai stood up. For some reason, he was still in the same posture with his hands raised. What did he intend to do? Some of them wondered if his young master intended to stimulate the morale of the soldiers by humiliating himself. Everybody looked at him, waiting for his order to attack. Time passed by. That person must have walked far away by now. Shen Yunmai still didn't make a sound. The atmosphere in the building of the military headquarters grew exceedingly depressing. Shen Yunmai suddenly laughed out. His laughter echoed in the spacious building of the military headquarters. Everybody could tell that it was not a sneer or a resentful laughter, but a genuine and joyful laughter. Nobody was stupid enough to ask his young master why he laughed. A few secretarial officers approached him as quickly as they could in an attempt to check on his injuries. Shen Yunmai asked, "Do you know why I've been raising my hands?" The officers did not know the answer, and they didn't dare speculate. "Idiots, it's because it hurts." Looking at his bloody arms, Shen Yunmai said after a moment of silence, "But it feels really good." Countless dark clouds gathered in the sky, blocking the dazzling light of the permanent star and the battleships. The huge battleship, the building of the military headquarters, had gradually disappeared behind the two of them. There was no pedestrian on the street. It was so quiet that it looked more like an abandoned civilization than the capital of the main planet. The quiet street, the tightly closed windows of the buildings, and the gravitational waves could be sensed everywhere. All these indicated that danger was waiting for them ahead. Jing Jiao halted his steps. He took out a pair of glasses from somewhere and put them on carefully. Seeing this, Ran Handong felt it odd, wondering if he still wanted to conceal his face at the moment. Jing Jiao lifted his head to look at a spot in the sky and said, "Would it be more effective if we attacked another battleship?" The dark clouds were thick in the sky. It was unclear why he was so certain that there would be a battleship there. More importantly, what did he mean by that? Ran Handong understood what he meant. Her face grew paler as she said in a low voice, "The government is exerting pressure on us. Please be patient." She truly understood what Jing Jiao meant. Jing Jiao could indeed see the battleship behind the clouds, and he could even see the markings of the engines on the battleship. It had nothing to do with the sword eyes, but the silver-rimmed glasses on the bridge of his nose. After the immortal Qi Song was killed by him, he had the glasses. After some study, he was certain that the glasses were the same as his ring. They were all data terminals. This data terminal could enter the military network through a secret passage without being detected by that entity. A great deal of data entered the glasses through the network. After being calculated and compared, the data would be displayed in a real-time simulation. The battleships, the laser cannon platforms, the gravitational field generators, the electromagnetic guns, the mechas, and many other military facilities appeared before his eyes. Soon, he received more data and information. The mechas of many powerful departments had blocked off the periphery of the street, and a few battleships were on their way back to the main planet in the distant space. It must be the so-called pressure from the government, or in other words, the sincerity of the government. Jingjiu didn't do anything else. He kept walking forward. Ran Handong hastened to catch up with him. She started introducing Shun Yunmai to Jingjiu to prevent him from having those unimaginable thoughts. In her opinion, Jingjiu should be interested in that person. As expected, when she told him about Shun Yunmai's glorious past in the fleet and the Science Academy, Jingjiu listened to her attentively. Ran Handong said, "In the beginning, many people guessed that he was the illegitimate son of General Li. But this rumor was soon proven to be false. It's because many people have seen that he didn't treat General Li politely, nor did he show any other emotion. And a high-level official of the government who insisted on this speculation was killed by him in public at a wine party. The law would only exert its power in a stable civilization. The Human Federation of the Milky Way had a high level of civilization, but it couldn't be considered stable due to the threat of the sea of dark matter. The tranquility in the last few years was more like the preparation period before a great turmoil. Shin Yunmai has been modifying his body. It's common among the swordsmen in the military. But it's strange that he has a strong aversion to the advanced technology, or in other words, he holds it in contempt." Ran Handong continued, "The people in the upper class know that he likes playing the zither, and he likes the kind of zither you have written, and he likes the legendary world of Xinxia. He has his reasons," said Jingjiu. Ran Handong didn't understand what he meant. Jingjiu admired the guy named Shin Yunmai. In the earlier fight, Shin Yunmai had demonstrated an outstanding talent in cultivation and fighting prowess, and he had a high attainment in the sword work. His Aoyama sword style was not inferior to that of Guang Yuanjunren, to say nothing of the disciples of the young generation like Zhou Ruzhui and Yuan Chu. In fact, it was even better. The seemingly messy attacks actually hid a clear intention, and his strategy was as good as that of Tong Yen. His sword heart was illuminated, and his lethal intent was as firm as a rock, not weaker than Zhao Lei's. More importantly, this descendant of the ascendants from Chao Tian and the humans in the Federation of the Milky Way had the advantages of the two worlds, and he combined the cultivation and the modern technology perfectly. He employed the low-temperature rays to wield the snow-flowing sword style and the laser guns to wield the thunder in all directions. It was not as simple as it sounded. It was impossible to achieve it unless one had a deep understanding of the two civilizations. According to Ran Handong, he was merely 26 years old. He was indeed a member of Aoyama. Jingjiu thought. Ran Handong continued, "This person acts as he pleases. He looks a bit crazy and perverted, but in fact he thinks everything is boring." Earlier in the building of the military headquarters, Shin Yunmai pinched her face and threatened to rape her. She felt terrified at the moment. Yet, she was fully aware that the reason he said and did so was not because of sexual desire, whether it was for the sake of sex, violence, or power. Shin Yunmai merely thought it was meaningless to live. "Nobody can figure out why a person like him thinks life is meaningless," said Ran Handong. Shin Yunmai was the most perfect human being in the universe regardless of the perspective, with a bright future ahead of him and a great cause ahead of him. Why would such a person sink into the swamp of nihilism? "He has no goal," was the answer given by Jingjiu. Ran Handong said, "It's true that he reached the peak state at a young age, but isn't there still the sea of dark matter?" "It's because the sea of dark matter is also in this universe," said Jingjiu. Ran Handong widened her eyes, wondering what he meant by that. "He's not confident enough," said Jingjiu, feeling a bit regretful. Ran Handong was even more baffled, wondering if any man would become a philosopher after putting on a pair of glasses. Chapter 837. Regardless of whether they were philosophers or scientists, they had to go back to their own homes and mothers after the work was done. Not everyone had a mother, but they always had a home, even if it was just a temporary residence, like the manor house of the priest clan. The whistling, floating train brought the air in the tunnel with it, bringing in the fresh air filled with the smell of wild grass, which was a gust of wind. As Jingjiu and Ran Handong returned to the small building, the main preacher and the others came over like a gust of wind. They intended to ask something, but Ran Handong stopped them on the ground floor. The Special District Capital is on lockdown. The fleet has issued a Level 3 warning, and the praying hall has sent many people here. Zhong Lizi had vaguely guessed something. "What has happened?" she asked Jingjiao. "I'm bored. Let's take a walk." Lying on the bamboo chair, Jingjiao rested with his eyes closed. When they were bored, they liked to go out for a walk by the river or in the park. However, the capital was on lockdown as soon as he took Ran Handong out for a walk, and the whole planet was alarmed. Where had he gone? Zhong Lizi had many questions, but she could tell that he was truly exhausted. She poured a cup of tea from the iron kettle and placed it on the tea table by the chair, heading for the outside of the room. Before she walked out of the room, she suddenly remarked, "You look pretty with the glasses on." The door of the room was closed slowly, soundless. Jingjiao opened his eyes and picked up the teacup to have a sip. He turned on the TV screen without taking off the glasses. As he came to the outside of the room, Jiang Yuxia and Hua Shi came up to him, asking what has happened. Zhong Lizi shook her head slightly and looked at Ran Handong, who was in a daze while leaning against the wall. Ran Handong turned to the guest room and sat on the chair. It wasn't until now that she had calmed down. Calmness usually meant that she had returned to reality. She had tried her best not to think about the fears flooding into her mind. Thinking of the scenes in the building of the military headquarters, her body began to tremble uncontrollably. Seeing the scene, Zhong Lizi and the others were startled. "Big sister, are you all right?" asked Hua Shi worriedly. Ran Handong waved her hand and took out a cigarette with her trembling fingers. She lit it up and inhaled twice. The smoke entered her body, bringing with it a slight spicy pain. It slightly eased her emotions, but it was still far from enough. It would be better if she could have a cup of strong alcohol, she thought. The fear came from Shun Yunmai's madness and Jingjiao's performance. At that moment, she really thought that Jingjiao would kill him, just like how he destroyed the warship in the Yinhai Nebula. If Shun Yunmai died, how many people would be buried with him? It could be the entire Federation of the Milky Way. The words "emergency news" appeared on the TV screens of countless households. Soon, the entire planet knew what had happened in the capital district today. The Alliance military headquarters was attacked by the surrendering faction. Those crazy Dark Force fanatics used extremely powerful weapons. The military eliminated all the terrorists in a very short period of time, but the military headquarters building still suffered a lot of damage. However, according to the news, not a single brave soldier or staff member died in this terrorist attack. Only a dozen or so people were injured by the rubble of the explosion. Jingjiao knew that some humans were the admirers of the sea of dark matter, and thought that the Federation of the Milky Way should give up resisting and accept the invasion of the darkness, becoming a part of eternity. Jingjiao could understand why those people had such an idea, but he couldn't accept it. As such, he appreciated the speed of the authorities' response and action. Jingjiao pulled back his gaze and picked up the teacup to have a sip. Then he closed his eyes again to rest. Though he didn't consume too much of his fairy energy in this fight, he still exerted some of his mental energy. He truly appreciated Shun Yunmai, which was similar to seeing a nearly perfect pearl or a raw stone of excellent quality. Yet, this didn't affect his attitude toward this person. It was too annoying to have the pearl dangling from his earlobe, and the raw stone had sharp edges that would hurt his feet on the way. What should he do then? He would, of course, tear it off or throw it away. If the person didn't listen to him, he would crush it into powder. This was the principle of killing with one swing of the sword. Why didn't he kill Shun Yunmai then? It was probably because many people would die because of this, like those on the Scorching Sun battleship and those in the Mingxin community. It was probably because Shun Yunmai was not easy to kill. His bones had been tempered by the fairy energy and were mixed with a special alloy, so he was not weaker than Jingjiao. To break the defense completely, Jingjiao would need at least 3,000 swings of the sword. It would be enough time for the military of the Federation of the Milky Way to construct a shield with a large gravitational field, and then the fireworks would explode inside. Jingjiao wouldn't accept the idea of perishing together with his enemy, even if there was only a slight risk. It was probably because there was someone else behind Shin Yunmai. That person was the real trouble. Whether it was in terms of seniority, relationship, or ability, he was a problem. He had hidden in the underground neighborhood of the Stargate and intended to come to the main planet after finding the Snow Girl. It was because he was aware that there were some weapons and people in this world who could pose a threat to him. He didn't want to deal with those people too soon, even though they didn't intend to kill him, as Generally had said in the phone call. Those were merely possibilities. Jingjiu was the only one who knew the real reason. It was then that a quarrel broke out downstairs, indicating that some new trouble had arrived. A few main preachers of the praying hall and General Ran arrived. The General Ran referred to was not the vice commander of the military, Ran Donglu, but his son, the big brother of Ran Handong. The expression on General Ran's face was grave, and the main preachers looked terrible. "Does he know what he is doing?" they asked the main preacher Tai Yang. The main preacher Tai Yang had been serving Jingjiu all this time and regarded him as a god, so he wouldn't allow anyone to disrespect him. "Do you guys know what you were doing?" he demanded icily. General Ran demanded while staring into his eyes. "He should be here, waiting to be summoned by that person. Why did he suddenly go to the special district of capital?" He felt bored waiting, so he asked me to go there with him to have a look. Ran Handong walked to the railing on the second floor and looked down at the crowd. A faint smoke came out from her mouth, along with her nonchalant voice. Seeing her in such a state and thinking of the news he had just received, General Ran couldn't control his emotion any longer. "Nobody can suppress such a significant event," he said icily. "The whole of the Federation will know the truth soon. Does he intend to instigate a war between the military and the praying hall and destroy the whole of the Federation? I hope he can come up with a reasonable explanation." Ran Handong said, "He's tired and needs to take a rest." General Ran grew even more furious, yelling, "What do you want to do this time?" Ran Handong extinguished the smoke in her hand on the wall and said nonchalantly, "My father asked me to assist him in all his affairs. I'm his secretary now." General Ran suppressed his emotion and whispered in her ear, "He is forcing us to express our opinion." It was true that Jingjiu was exerting pressure on the allied government and the priests behind the government, no matter whether it was the matter of the building of the military headquarters or the preparation of a battleship. At such a critical moment, the government and that person had to make a decision as soon as possible, whether they would be on Jingjiu's side or not. Ran Handong was aware of what was on Jingjiu's mind, which was why she asked him to be patient with the government in the special district of capital. "What's the problem?" she asked expressionlessly. General Ran thought it was absurd, saying, "He is merely one person no matter how strong he is. As long as those battleships didn't return to the inner part of the galaxy, all the regions and the populace were under the control of the government, at least nominally." Though there were many preconditions and attributions, the government was the ruler of this world in fact, save for the military headquarters. The Praying Hall, as the only legitimate inheritor and propagator of the distant ancient civilization, had countless believers and the power of faith from billions of stars. The government and the Praying Hall were one side of the human civilization. It was extremely arrogant of a human to force the whole civilization to express their opinion. Ran Handong's response to this was simple and straightforward. "Shin Yunmai has almost died today." Upon hearing this, General Ran and the main preachers of the Praying Hall were all stunned, frozen on the spot. What had happened in the building of the military headquarters that day couldn't be concealed from the whole world, but the details of what had happened in the building were kept confidential. Even the Ran family didn't know about it. Shin Yunmai was the advisor of the highest level in the military headquarters, the most outstanding figure in the Federation of Milky Way, and one of the strongest swordsmen in this world, but he had almost been killed by that person. "As you know, I was on the scene," Ran Handong said, while holding the deformed tobacco in her hand, while staring into her brother's eyes. "So I'm certain that this is his intention. It's time for you, or that person, to express his intention." General Ran still couldn't accept the fact, murmuring, "Even if what you said is true, he is still too reckless. It's meaningless to talk about it." What he needs now is an answer. When will that person be willing to meet him? I'll give you, Ran Handong paused for a moment before continuing, 3 days. Otherwise, I think you will meet that person himself. Upon hearing this, the main preachers of the praying hall left the small building hastily with a changed expression on their faces. Seeing them disappear on the other side of the manor, Ran Handong turned around and returned to the room. I think we'll hear from him soon, she said to Jing Jiao. Looking at the tasteless tea in the teacup, Jing Jiao said, "What you said is correct. This is my intention, but 3 days is too long." Recalling that he said on the street in the special district of capital that he would shoot down another battleship, Ran Handong said with a pale face, "Please calm down and be more patient." "I'm not fishing. Why should I be patient?" snapped Jing Jiao. After a moment of silence, Ran Handong said, "I'll boil some new tea for you." Chapter 838. Fishing required patience, and so did brewing tea. It was not necessary to drink tea, but one had to wait for the tea to be brewed before drinking it. The silvery coals in the small stove turned red slowly, and the water in the iron kettle would boil for a while. Jing Jiao walked to the deck and looked at the night sky, reflecting on something. The stars could be seen during the day here, and there were even more stars at night, more than in Chaotian and the Stargate. The stars seemed to fill up the entire sky. It was impolite to those with trypophobia. If it weren't for the protective shield, the main planet would be unsuitable for humans to sleep at night. Even though the protective shield had filtered most of the starlight, the manor house and the distant mountains could still be seen clearly. Zhong Lizi, Jiang Yuxia, and Hua Shi were sitting on the grass. Hua Shi was playing with the tangible starlight with her fingers, feeling quite happy. Zhong Lizi said softly, "I knew he must be an outstanding person, but I didn't expect him to be so outstanding." He was regarded as a new god by the female priest of the Stargate, but he had come back unscathed. This was beyond her imagination. Looking at the figure on the deck, Jiang Yuxia sighed. "I didn't expect it either." Hua Shi didn't know why her two big sisters looked at them with widened eyes, looking at them with a heavy heart on such a beautiful night and under the starlight. "I didn't expect that I wouldn't even be qualified to say that I liked a boy in front of him after I fell in love with him," Jiang Yuxia continued. Zhong Lizi said comfortingly while rubbing her head, "It's useless even if I said that. He would definitely say something boring like hormone secretion, reproduction, and inferior." "How did you know that?" asked Hua Shi curiously. He had learned everything he needed to know. It was about the attack on the building of the military headquarters. Of course, only the important figures in the upper echelons of the Federation of the Milky Way and the military officers in the building knew the truth. The populace who had seen the news felt uneasy, and then they were enraged and courageous. A few demonstrations took place on planet Tianpu, which had always been aloof from worldly affairs, to demand the government to crack down harder on the capitulators. The fire-passing pagoda on various planets had received countless well-wishers, and the praying hall had received more offerings. It was unclear if this was a pleasant surprise or not. The military had to do something regardless of whether it was to alleviate the anger of the populace or to give a superficial explanation. The military's Internal Affairs Division worked together with the powerful police department to crack down on the capitulators in various sectors. The Starpeak fleet entered the deep part of the Jelly Star region bravely and began to wipe out the remaining monsters of the sea of dark matter on the surface of the cold planet. Young Master Shun, the highest-ranking advisor of the army, was the commander of this fleet. Naturally, he had also left the main planet. The news would not be broadcasted, and the ordinary people would not be able to see the real danger of the remaining monsters and the terrorist attacks of the capitulators in some places. What did the movement of the Star Edge fleet have to do with the return of the fleet stationed at the second forward operating base? Why did the important departments of the government, the manors of the priest masters, and the praying halls in various places suddenly turn on the devices of the gravitational fields at the same time and turn them on to the maximum without regard for the energy consumption? The Alliance Management Committee suddenly held an emergency meeting in the early hours of the morning. Could it be that they were only discussing the fleet budget? More importantly, why did Cluster, the most advanced command warship of the Alliance, leave the Star Chain fleet and come to the main planet through the Enhine Nebula alone? 3 days after the command warship named Cluster had passed through the Enhine Nebula, the invitation from the Praying Hall had finally passed through the gravitational field of the manor and landed on the tea table. There was a small stove not far from the tea table, on which the water in the iron kettle gurgled. It sounded like a mocking voice, at least in the ears of the main preachers of the Praying Hall. Jingjio didn't look at the invitation, nor did he make things difficult for these main preachers. He got up and said, "Let's go." There was a female priest in every sector of the Federation of the Milky Way, responsible for inheriting the tinder of the civilization and gathering the belief of the populace. These female priests were named after the planets they resided on, like the female priest of the Stargate, whom Jingjio was most familiar with. The female priest on a main planet was the only one who was special. It was because she was special to begin with. She was the first female priest during the rebirth of the human civilization, and it was unclear where she got the inheritance of the distant ancient civilization. With the tinder of the distant ancient civilization, the humans who reappeared on the main planet developed their intelligence again and entered the interstellar era at a great speed. She was the only connection between this world and the civilization that had disappeared more than 100,000 years ago, and she was the true enlightened person. All the female priests were her students and had to be appointed by her. As such, she came here from the Stargate base. The whole human world appreciated her existence and admired her. All the counselors of the management committee, the heads of the clans for thousands of generations, and those ambitious generals had to kneel down when they saw her and kiss the instep of her feet. Nobody dared call her by her real name, and nobody knew her real name. It was even unclear how many generations she had inherited the title. She didn't have a title either. Everybody called her that one. The female priest of the Stargate believed that Jingjio was the new god in the prophecy, but she had to get the approval of that one. This was one of the 3 purposes for which Jingjio came to the main planet. The gravitational field of the mansion of the priest clan opened a passage. A silvery, streamlined spaceship left the ground and headed toward the north of the magnificent mountains. The human civilization had entered the interstellar era and possessed endless energy sources. As a result, a streamlined spaceship like this was rarely seen, which gave it a classical beauty. The beautiful silvery spaceship passed the mountains and arrived at a patch of more beautiful prairie. Sitting by the window, Jingjio looked down and saw many buildings scattered on the prairie. He could smell the gravitational field that he didn't like everywhere. In the next moment, he noticed that there were many heat sources under the prairie. It was unclear if they were the laser guns, the missile platforms, or the heavy ion cannons secretly developed by the military. These buildings were the praying halls on the main planet. The silvery spaceship didn't land here, but kept heading north. After a long while, it arrived at the northernmost Pingmo Plateau. The surface of the plateau was covered with white snow, and patches of moss could be seen once in a while, looking like the paints thrown onto the canvas by the avant-garde artists. In comparison to the ground, the scene in the sky was even more marvelous. Countless snowflakes drifted down from the dark clouds, but they couldn't land on the ground. They were restrained by an invisible force, drifting or flowing slowly along a curved surface. Looking from a distance, it looked like a huge snowball that had been pounded into the ground by God. Gazing at the surface of the huge snowball, Jingjio recalled a small toy he had seen in Zhong Lizi's apartment. The main preachers of the praying hall on the spaceship were used to seeing such a scene, so they remained calm. It was the first time for Ran Handong to see such a thing. What is this? Why is it not on the satellite map? It's the gravitational field, replied Jingjio. Judging from the flowing tracks of the snowflakes and the curved surface of the snowball, it was easy to infer that it was the effect of the gravitational field. Ran Handong was very knowledgeable, so she was able to ascertain this fact soon enough, but she still couldn't believe it. How could the surface of the planet have such a powerful gravitational field, she exclaimed. Jingjiao didn't answer her question, and main preachers of the praying hall didn't explain it either. It took a while before she realized it. That person lived here, so any kind of miraculous phenomenon could happen. The silvery spaceship flew to the front of the huge snowball. The gaps between the alloy plates vibrated at a high frequency. If it continued for a long time, the spaceship would break apart. Fortunately, it didn't take long for a hole to appear on the surface of the huge snowball. The silvery spaceship flew into the hole soundlessly. The scenery outside the window had changed instantly. The snowflakes caused by the strong gravitational field were like the catkins stuck to the surface of the lake, blocking the entire sky. Yet, they didn't block all the sunlight. It was just a bit dark like a regular cloudy day. There were many mountains in this world, but they were not too high and densely covered with forests. The snowflakes could be seen once in a while, giving off a sense of cold beauty. There was a green lake amid the mountains. The water was calm and smooth, looking like the green sky mirror. If one looked at it in the distance, one could even see the traces of glaciers. It was a beautiful scene. There was a gray building by the lake. Its surface should be made of cement, but it didn't look out of place by the edge of the forest. It was at least much better than the dozen spaceships. Dozens of people stood in front of the gray building, discussing something in a low voice in a few groups. The middle-aged men and women on the left in the dark formal suits are the counselors of the management committee. The old men in casual clothes in the front are the generals in the military. You should have seen my father. Ran Handong followed Jing Jiao to the lakeside as she introduced the identities of those people in a low voice. The counselors of the Federation of the Milky Way and the governments of various planets were very cautious about the military and the organization hiding in the shadows. The military was not as united as before, and they all obeyed the orders of General Li. And there were many forces like Ran Donglu who were loyal to the female priest. These important figures came to this plateau in the extreme north that day because they wanted to know the result as soon as possible. If that person really believed that Jingjiao was the new god, they would cooperate with her no matter whether it was a propaganda tactic of the priest clan or something else. Seeing the silvery spaceship land, the important figures looked in his direction, but they didn't move. Jingjiao didn't heed them either. He came to the lakeside under the lead of the main preacher of the praying hall and boarded a fishing boat propelled by the primitive gasoline, heading toward the center of the lake. A straight crack appeared on the mirror-like surface of the lake. The fog in the deep end of the lake was disturbed, but it didn't grow thinner. Instead, it grew thicker. Seeing the fishing boat disappear into the fog on the surface of the lake, Ran Handong crossed her arms reflexively, her eyes full of worry. If he were the new god, he would have won the approval of that person, and he would be fine. If he were the god chosen by that person, he would be even more fine. Ran Donglu came up behind her. Ran Handong turned to her father. She intended to say something, but she didn't know how to start. Noticing her expression, Ran Donglu asked, "What's wrong?" Ran Handong said after a moment of silence, "I don't think he came here to win the approval of that person." The fishing boat entered the fog and soon arrived at the other shore. Jingjiao got off the boat and landed on the shore. After passing a patch of forest, he saw a city. His intuition was correct. The green lake, enshrouded by the mountains, had a huge generating device for the gravitational field and a high-level protective shield. No one could be seen in the city, and it was soundless. It was like a graveyard. The buildings here were all very tall, usually dozens of stories high. The surfaces of the buildings were strangely covered with glass panels, showing no intention of conserving the energy. The streets between the buildings were also very wide, much wider than those in Shoer City and the special district of Capital City. They were wide enough for 100 people to walk side by side. Soon, he found out the reason, because he saw the vehicles parked on both sides of the street. Those vehicles were rusty, as if they would fall apart if he touched them with his hand, but the particles emitting from them could still be detected. These vehicles, like the fishing boat, were powered by the lowest form of biological energy. However, the time of more than 100,000 years was enough for the bones of the big demons at the bottom of the Gathered Soul Valley to turn into powder. But why could these vehicles retain their original shape? The whole city was enshrouded in the faint fog. He was walking in the city. It didn't take long for him to ascertain that this place was a part of the rumored ruins of the distant ancient civilization. There was no generating device for the gravitational field, no nuclear device, and no space elevator in the ruins. Judging from the details, it should be in the early stage of the distant ancient civilization, which was much more backward than the current Federation of the Milky Way. Why did that person choose to live here? It's because this is the world I experienced in the beginning, and it's the time I miss the most. The door of a black car by the street opened slowly. A young woman walked out of the car. Chapter 839. Its black color was inconspicuous, especially in the thin fog. But this black carriage was easily noticed because it was quite new compared to those abandoned carriages on the street. It must have been well protected. The girl who walked out of the black carriage was also new, both in her flowery dress and the umbrella she held in her hand. She looked as if she had just left the factory, exuding a fresh yet strange aura. This site is isolated under the crust of the plateau, so it's well preserved. Of course, it's been repaired for many years, so these carriages are all new. The girl's voice was calm, devoid of any emotion, like the umbrella in her hand, which didn't move a bit in the breeze. The umbrella covered her face. Jingzhou's line of sight fell on her feet, and he found she was wearing a pair of ordinary black leather shoes, with furry socks piled around her ankles, looking quite cute. The wind grew stronger, dispersing the fog a bit. It turned out that there was a river not far from the street. Holding the umbrella, the girl walked onto the bridge and crossed the river. Jingzhou followed behind her. After they got off the bridge, the fog in the city grew thicker, covering the lifeless buildings. The mountain scenery ahead became clearer. There was a courtyard in the mountain, with black eaves and white walls, with flowering trees and residual snow. It was somewhat similar to the scenery garden outside Cloudy Town. There was a hot spring in the deep part of the courtyard, giving off faint hot fog. There was a low square table by the water, with a chair on each side of the table. The girl walked to the edge of the hot spring and sat on the chair. She closed the umbrella in her hand and put it on the ground. The flowery dress was very thin, looking like a bathrobe. It drifted up like the wind and dropped down like the clouds. The flowers on the dress were sunflowers, which reminded Jingzhou of the oil painting in the Stargate Art Gallery. He sat down on the other chair and looked at the opposite side. The girl's silky black hair was neatly cut, covering her eyebrows like a curtain. It looked like the skin of a watermelon when it was blown by the wind. Her eyebrows were very thin, as if they were drawn. Her nose was very small, and her lips were very red, like cherries. Her face was very white and smooth, like a freshly peeled egg. More precisely, it was like a flawless white porcelain. Shin Yunmai once commented that Jingzhou was like a porcelain doll in the building of the military headquarters. This girl was a real deal. Picturesque eyebrows and eyes did not mean that they were beautiful, because not all paintings were beautiful. Perfect skin did not necessarily represent beauty, because it could be fake. That snow-white face didn't have any anger. Those two thin eyebrows and cherry-like red lips also didn't have any anger. Seeing this face, Jingzhou thought of the young officer on the Scorching Sun battleship. The girl took out 2 small porcelain bottles and 2 small translucent wine cups from the hot spring, placed them on the short table, and began to pour wine. The scene of a jade-like hand reaching out from her sleeve was very beautiful. His fingers picked up the cup and poured the wine very naturally. The strong amber liquor was no longer pungent after being soaked in the hot spring. All the details exuded a natural and moving aura. Jingzhou felt that these movements and details were too natural and deliberate. He knew that the girl sitting in front of him was not a real human, nor was she that person's true form. To put it more precisely, the person who was going to talk to him today was not here. She should be somewhere else, or even on another planet. Ordinary people might find it hard to adapt to this kind of conversation, but Jingzhou was used to it. Back when he was in the snowland, the long-distance spiritual communication between him and the snow girl was essentially the same as today's. The first thing to do before any conversation was to know the identity of the other party. Jingjiu was certain that the other party had read the book he wrote, but he still told her his name. Fei, the girl said softly. Jingjiu didn't know how to respond to this name. What do you want to ask? Asked the girl. Many people thought that Jingjiu had to be examined by the girl if he wanted to win her approval and become the new god. But it was not the case. It was not the girl who was in charge of asking questions, but Jingjiu. Jingjiu asked a question first. Where does the standard time refer to? Jingjiu had written some words on that piece of paper in the underground apartment. Later, he added 2 more words on the paper when he was at the University of Stargate. Those words included a year, a month, and a standard day. There were also some other words. The humans had many planets at the moment, and each planet had a different time for public transit and self-transit. So, it had its own time pattern. But the Federation of the Milky Way had a set of standard time when it came to counting the years and traveling in space. Jingjiu had confirmed many times that none of the planets inhabited by humans had a set of standard astronomical rules. The voice of the girl was devoid of any emotion. It seemed that she was not surprised to hear this question. The distant ancient civilization originated from a planet. The standard time is the rule there. Hearing this answer, Jingjiu was not surprised, continuing to ask, "What about the moon?" "That planet has a companion star," said the girl. Jingjiu continued, "I've read about the eclipse of the moon by the heavenly dog or the eclipse of the sun in some books, and I've also seen it there." "It's like what you've seen in your world," said the girl. Jingjiu looked at the hot fog above the hot spring. His line of sight penetrated it, as if he wanted to see the huge snowball outside the gravitational field, the sky outside the snowball, the universe outside the sky, and the other side of the universe. Jingjiu asked, "Where's our world?" The girl picked up the small wine cup with 2 fingers and brought it to her cherry-like lips to take a sip, saying softly, "God can't create the world. He can only discover some new worlds." Jingjiu pulled back his line of sight and asked her snow-white face, "Don't you want to give me a precise answer? Everyone who comes out from your world asks me these questions. You're not special or particularly smart, and you're no different from them. Why do you deserve special treatment from me then?" pressed the girl. Jingjiu put his feet into the hot spring. He did this not to show that he was in a leisurely mood, but for a deeper reason. As for what the deeper reason was, it was unknown for the time being, and nobody asked him about it at the moment. After all, neither Zhuo Rizhui nor Gu Qing had ascended. The girl fixed her line of sight on Jingjiu's feet in the hot spring, asking, "Do you feel anything?" Without turning his head, Jingjiu asked back, "Do you feel anything when you drink wine?" "This body has enough sensory cells," said the girl, "so my senses are richer than those of humans." "I don't feel anything," Jingjiu said. "It's a bit miserable," said the girl. "The lava bath is not bad," said Jingjiu. The girl thought about it and said, "That makes sense." Jingjiu turned around and looked into her eyes, saying, "You see, I'm different from those ascenders." The corners of the girl's mouth curled up at an extremely slow speed, revealing a rather eerie smile, saying, "You want to convince me that you're the same as me?" Chapter 840. "We are the same," said Jingjiu. The young woman said expressionlessly, "In order to gain my approval, you are willing to give up your previous obsession and admit that you are not a human being." It was evident that she had read the book titled The Path Toward Heaven. "Now that I can become a god, why do I still want to be a human being?" Jingjiu's response was quite interesting. "That's just someone's opinion. It doesn't mean I agree with it." The young woman curled up the corners of her mouth again, letting out a faint smile. The smile was a bit eerie because it was mechanical. Looking at the light snowflakes falling down from the sky, Jingjiu said, "It doesn't matter." As he did so, the hood of the blue hoodie fell off, exposing his face, which was covered by a few snowflakes. He had never been a god, but he had played a similar role. In the eyes of the younger generation and mortals in the cultivation circle of Chaotian, The immortal Jingyang was a god. Since it doesn't matter, why did you come to the main planet and do those things to see me? Asked the young woman. Jingjio said, becoming a new god will help me achieve my goal. In other words, it's a convenient condition. Do you intend to make use of me? Pressed the young woman. Jingjio said, I'm good at making use of things. This statement had a profound meaning. It was because of the word things. The young woman didn't get angry. What is your goal? She asked nonchalantly. Jingjio pulled back his gaze and looked at her pale and lifeless face, saying, cultivating, of course. The young woman asked, the purpose of your cultivation in Chaotian is to ascend. Now that you are here, why do you still want to cultivate? The purpose of ascending is to come out, and the purpose of cultivation is to exist. This answer was the same as what he had said in the illusionary realm of the green sky mirror. The young woman said, the low-speed photons might be the fairy energy you need and can make you stronger, but it has nothing to do with the essence of existence. I don't think this world is the essence either, said Jingjio. There is no space outside of space, and there is no time outside of time. The young woman said softly, this world will be like this from the beginning of time until the end of time. What about the sea of dark matter? Asked Jingjio. The girl said, the overflow of dark matter is due to the tearing of the dimensional space. That dark world is also a part of this world. When the snowflakes fell on the surface of the hot spring, they instantly disappeared without a trace. However, when they fell on the two of them, they did not melt. Soon, a shallow layer of snow accumulated. No matter where they fell, the snowflakes made no sound. The courtyard was unusually quiet, and the chilly wind gave people a feeling of despair and indifference. After a long while, Jingjio gave a response. I don't believe that time has an end. Existence is meaningless. The girl picked up the cup of amber-colored liquor and looked at it in silence for a long time before saying, Xinyan Mai came to see me for the first time when he was 5 years old, and he said the same thing. Jingjio retracted his feet from the hot spring and stood firmly on the floor. When he was 18, he came here again and sat in this position for an entire night. Then, he cried his heart out and became like this. The girl continued. Jingjio could understand that kind of despair. The universe had no boundary, but it had a beginning and an end. The beginning was unreasonable, and the end meant that everything was unreasonable. As such, the existence of oneself and the existence of all things would be meaningless. Do you like that child? Jingjio asked. I like someone who is willing to think and has the ability to think. The girl suddenly asked, why didn't you kill him? Jingjio said, maybe it's because the way he thinks about these things is similar to how I used to be. If you didn't kill him, how could I trust you? The girl continued nonchalantly while staring into his eyes. The soldiers on that battleship and the immortal Chi song are not enough. Jingjio said, you know that I'm different from those cocoon breakers. I don't have any ambition. It's not a scheme. A long time ago, there was a cocoon breaker who should have come from the same place as you. He refused to be recruited by the cocoon breakers of the previous generation, and he even helped me kill many people. The girl continued. In fact, he merely wanted to gain my approval and control me, but I've seen through him. And then, Jingjio asked. The girl didn't answer this question, but said, if you want me to trust you, you have to give me one of their heads, no matter whether it's Shun Yunmai or General Li. At first, I did have this idea, Jingjio went on, but at the last moment, I suddenly thought, why do I need your approval? The girl said, you don't like the way those cocoon breakers do things, and you've become enemies with them, at least on the surface. And according to what you said, you need this civilization to help you achieve your goal. Jingjio said, but your civilization also needs me to resist the control of those ascendants. To put it more precisely, you need me to guarantee your independent existence. The girl gently put down the wine cup. As she did so, the snowflakes fell down, revealing the broken flowers on her bathrobe. This was the truth. The snowflakes continued to fall down soundlessly. They disappeared instantly like willow catkins. The courtyard became absolutely quiet. He looked at the snowflakes falling down from the sky. She looked at the snowflakes falling into the lake. They sat opposite each other in silence. Time passed slowly. The hot fog on the surface of the lake gradually dispersed. The light in the sky changed. It was unclear how much time had passed. The girl said, "Let's have a cup of wine again when we have time." Jingjiu agreed and got up, heading toward the outside of the courtyard. The hot spring courtyard was located on a mountain, and there was a river outside the mountain. On the other side of the river was a city left by the distant ancient civilization. There was a large lake on the other side of the city, which was full of fog. The real world was on the other side of the fog. The buildings scattered by the lake had a sense of history, and the important figures standing in the buildings were a part of the history. Looking at the thick fog on the lake, these important figures felt nervous, or rather, complicated. That person was the most mysterious being in this world. Nobody had ever seen her in person. Could Jingjiu see her? What would be the outcome of the conversation that day? The thick fog was suddenly broken, and the old boat came out from the inside. Dozens of gazes followed the boat to the shore, and then fell on the youth wearing a blue hoodie. Jingjiu didn't pay attention to them. He walked toward the silver spaceship in the distance. Ran Handong followed him hastily after shooting a glance at her father. The cold wind whistled, ruffling the grass by the lake. The spaceship headed toward the sky and soon disappeared into the snowy layer in the high sky. Seeing the scene, the important figures were startled, wondering if the spaceship had left just like that. "Brother Donglu, what's going on?" A head of an aristocratic clan walked to the side of General Ran and asked, "What is the outcome?" "No outcome means nothing has been decided yet," said Ran Donglu expressionlessly. Then he looked at the counselor walking over with the head of the clan, saying, "We have to do what we have to do." The counselor asked with raised eyebrows, "Is it meaningful? That article, those documents, and this game are all a coincidence." Ran Donglu went on, "The so-called coincidence is sometimes a chance, even if it's only temporary." The counselor remained silent. The head of an aristocratic clan raised his eyebrows, indicating that he didn't agree with this statement. Looking at the counselors and the important figures in the military not far away, Ran Donglu asked emotionlessly, "What's their attitude? They don't understand." The head of an aristocratic clan said without hesitation, "It's true that the military has been too tough over the years, but the situation is still under control. Because of the arrival of that person, we suddenly have to choose a side. They don't understand, and neither do I. Not many people are willing to believe the information from the praying hall. The term God was beyond the scope of the mortal world. Who was that youth wearing a blue hoodie? The praying hall and the government had isolated the manor well. Nobody could get close to Jingjiu, let alone find out anything about him. Neither this head of an aristocratic clan nor other important figures knew the background of Jingjiu. Why did they take such a risk and disrupt the peace of the Federation of the Milky Way for this person? The counselor knew something about the Stargate base, but he couldn't give an explanation. "I don't know his identity or what that article means, but the game will be popularized in a short time. We need to find out how he will react. Most importantly, we need to find out how those people will react after they enter the game. We need to collect the data." Ran Donglu's line of sight followed the disappearing silvery spaceship into the deep part of the snowy cloud. As he said, "It's the best opportunity to find out the advantages and disadvantages of those people." Young Master Shun promised not to touch him for 60 days. There are only 50 days left, and in a few days, the cloudy battleship will arrive on the main planet. The head of an aristocratic clan went on with furrowed brows. "If he dies, what's the point of doing all this? Take care of your health. Remember to wear masks and go out less. Don't look down on others. No matter what you do, staying healthy is the prerequisite." Chapter 841. The silvery spaceship broke through the snowball and returned to the main planet. It didn't take long for it to pass through the mountains and countless gazes in the praying hall and return to the manor. The silvery ashes in the stove exuded a warm red glow. The green tea in the iron kettle was poured into a glass cup, giving off a warm mist along with a faint fragrance. Jingjiu picked up the teacup and had a sip. He lifted his head to look at the lawn outside the deck and the flowering trees in the distance. It was unclear what he was thinking. Huashi looked at Jingjiu with widened eyes. As she was about to ask him something, she was dragged out of the room by Jiang Yuxia. What kind of person is that person? Zhong Lizi couldn't help but ask out of curiosity after a moment of hesitation. Jingjiu pulled back his gaze and looked at the tea in the cup. After a moment of silence, he said, "Someone like me." The young woman with long black hair and wearing a bathrobe with floral embroidery and sitting by the hot spring drinking the strong liquor was a biochemical person, or a robot. As such, the person hiding behind her must be someone like him. Standing behind Jingjiu, Ran Handong showed no expression on her face, her lips pressed tightly together, looking like a secretary who had no self-awareness. She was fully aware that Jingjiu didn't care about the opinion of that person. If he were a true god, he wouldn't need the approval of others. But why did he want to meet that person in a hurry? This is a world controlled by the Ascendants, or the Cocoon Breakers, as you know. Jingjiu continued to Ran Handong. The female priests and the people of the Federation of the Milky Way represented by your father don't like the current situation. They need me. He had no intention of concealing it from Zhong Lizi, but Zhong Lizi couldn't understand what he meant. She opened her mouth slightly, her face full of bewilderment. Ran Handong said in a slightly nervous voice, "My father and the others probably didn't think of changing the situation so quickly, and that person probably didn't either. It's you who forced them to make a choice." Jingjiu said, "Time is the most precious thing. We shouldn't waste it on guessing and wavering. Now that we have an idea, we should realize it as soon as possible." Ran Handong pressed, "Do you feel pressured because the cloudy battleship is coming back?" Jingjiu said, "I can change direction at any time." Ran Handong had guessed that Jingjiu came from the same place as those cocoon breakers, but she didn't expect him to actually consider it. "You've destroyed that battleship and killed so many people, and you've almost killed Shun Yunmai. Do you think they will accept you?" Jingjiu said, "I can destroy that battleship and kill so many people, and I can kill Shun Yunmai at any time. That's more valuable than everything else." Everyone knew that the youth in the blue hoodie was very valuable. His origins were very mysterious, as though he had appeared out of thin air. He possessed a realm and strength unimaginable in this universe. He went to the building of the military department and severely wounded Shun Yunmai, the greatest pride of the military of the Alliance, under the gaze of numerous people and heavy weapons. He went to the ancient civilization ruins shrouded in thick fog and had a conversation with that person that no one knew about. Then, he returned unscathed. However, this did not mean that no one dared to kill him. That person hadn't expressed his position yet, and the praying hall hadn't acknowledged his identity. Billions of believers didn't know of his existence. The military of the Alliance wouldn't do anything to him in 60 days because of Shun Yunmai's promise, but the cloudy battleship was on its way back. How would the supreme commander of the military treat him? As everybody was pondering these questions nervously, Jingjiu was thinking of something else. Even though billions of stars shone on him, the deep end of the universe was still dark, like the gloomy future at the end of time. According to the calculation of the Science Academy of the Federation, the mass of the universe was still insufficient even if the dark matter and antimatter were taken into account. As a result, it was impossible for the seemingly monotonous cycle to take place. Everything would be destroyed. As such, everything would be meaningless. It was because life was short and would come to an end. Even billions of years were too short for eternity. It was the same for life. This was the greatest sorrow of the intelligent beings, the source of Shun Yunmai's madness, and the ultimate problem that Jingjiu had been trying to solve. As he was thinking of all this, Jingjiu was not on the deck chair in the mansion of the priest clan, but on a satellite. It was a military satellite. All the instruments and devices were installed in a semi-transparent cover, the surface of which was very smooth. If it weren't for the absence of gravity, it would be difficult for him to lie on the satellite quietly. Looking at the permanent star in the distance, Jingjiu narrowed his eyes. The permanent star should have 11 billion years left to live, but it was still not enough. The glow of the permanent star brought some warmth, but it was soon taken away by the cold intent in the universe. It reminded him of the snowland in Chaotian. Jingjiu operated the magic method silently with his eyes closed. The bright light rays turned into tiny golden particles invisible to the naked eye when they shone on his face and body. They seeped into his skin soundlessly and then deepened. They didn't refract or resist, which was completely different from the physical phenomenon in the laboratory. The broken light rays were absorbed into his body like flowing water. The whole process was peaceful, but it was beautiful. It was like the line in the poem. After a long while, Jingjiu opened his eyes. A flash of golden light flashed in the deep end of his eyes, but it soon disappeared. It was like a shooting star streaking across the night sky, or like a flower blooming in the transparent glass. The broken light rays were no longer glittering like the crystal shavings. They disappeared into his body and became the fairy energy needed by the cultivation practitioners. The space was not isolated by the atmosphere or the protective shield, and the distance to the permanent star was relatively close, so it was much faster for him to absorb the fairy energy. In less than 2 hours, he had absorbed a sufficient amount of immortal qi. The fairy energy consumed by killing the immortal qi song, destroying that battleship, and fighting against Shinyunmai had all been replenished. The cloudy battleship would arrive on the main planet soon. He had to be in the best condition to face General Li, both in terms of his spiritual energy and fairy energy. He turned around and flew toward the main planet. The satellite was left at its original spot. The figures of the space stations could be seen not far away, and many thin lines could be seen further away, which were all space elevators. Many observation devices were aimed at the seemingly ordinary satellite. It was because Jingjiu had lain there for a long time. The swordsmen in the star state of the Federation of the Milky Way could stay in the space or on the surface of a planet without an atmosphere for a long time, but nobody was willing to do so because the invisible cosmic rays were a threat. The space agency of the Federation government and the battleships responsible for the defense of the entire star region must have been analyzing the scene that had just occurred. What was he doing? The side of the main planet facing the permanent star was very bright, and it was daytime. The other side was very dark, and it was still night. A bright light suddenly appeared in the dark world, which looked like a sword light in a game or a shooting star. The scene appeared on countless light screens. A few private TV stations noticed it and started to broadcast it live. The battleships and the officials of the space agency knew what the shooting star-like light was. There was no alarm, and there was no sound of space weapons being activated. The world was still as quiet as before. Seeing the shooting star land somewhere in the north of the planet, many people had a peculiar feeling. This was the era of the explosion of science and technology, the modification of genes, and the cultivation of martial arts. Many swordsmen emerged, but they were merely a part of the interplanetary civilization. It was evident that the person represented by the shooting star and the sword light was more than that. The lawn was illuminated for a moment and then returned to normal. The discussions outside the courtyard stopped abruptly and then started again, but in a much lower volume. Zhong Lizi helped Jingjiu put on his clothes and straighten his collar. Then, she turned around and poured a cup of tea with the right temperature for him. As the successor of the female priest of the Stargate, she served Jingjiu like a maid. In the beginning, many people in the priest manor felt shocked and even angry, but they didn't pay any attention to her now. Ran Handong walked to the side of the chair and brought out the light screen, as if she hadn't seen the scene. She started reporting according to the data on the screen. The believers in all the cities on the main planet have started the candlelight procession. Nobody mentioned your name, but they should all know it in secret. She continued after a pause. If that person expresses his opinion, the praying hall should be able to convince more than 70% of the believers to accept it in 20 standard days. She was talking about the prophecy of the new god. Jing Jiu uttered, "There's a list here. Take a look at it." Many people wanted to meet Jing Jiu recently, and they were all important figures in the Federation of the Milky Way, like the heads of those clans, the counselors, and the generals. But she couldn't make the decision for some of them. As such, she insisted on letting Jing Jiu have a look at the list, even though she knew that he would refuse it. Jing Jiu took a look at the list. As he was about to say that he didn't want to meet anybody like he had done 2 days ago, he suddenly saw a familiar name. The reason he was familiar with the name wasn't because he had seen it somewhere, but because he had signed it himself. Those who came to the mansion of the priest clan to visit Jing Jiu were those who thought they were qualified to visit him, and those who were qualified to pass the investigation of Ran Handong and bring their names to Jing Jiu must be some important figures. For instance, they were the female priest who came from an important planet and the third commander of the Central Star Fleet. Xiaoyu was a counselor of the Administrative Committee of the Federation, though he was not a senior member. He was the owner of a large gaming company and had a great amount of wealth, but he was not so important in terms of strategy. Normally, his name was not qualified to appear on the list. Fortunately, Ran Handong knew who he was and some other information. The name of the large gaming company was the Twirling Rain. Zhong Lizi handed him a cup of tea and glanced at him, but she didn't find anything special about him. Why did he choose the path toward heaven at first glance and spend so much money and resources to modify it into the current game? If Jing Jiu was indeed the new god in the prophecy, it would undoubtedly be the most significant venture investment in the history of mankind. Xiaoyu was aware of Zhong Lizi's identity. He took the teacup with both of his hands and said to Jing Jiu softly, "We've collected some data according to Mr. Donglo's request." Jing Jiu knew what the data collection was, wondering if the snow girl was among them. "Everyone is fine." Chapter 842. Hearing what Xiaoyu said, Ran Handong felt surprised, wondering what it was that had something to do with her father. If it was her father's idea to collect the data, why did this Chairman Shah visit her according to the usual procedure instead of using his family connections to find her? Xiaoyu didn't explain it to her, and Ran Handong didn't ask about it either. It meant that this matter was very important and confidential, and nobody should know about it. "Thanks for your hard work," said Jing Jiu. Xiaoyu took out the chip from his bracelet and put it on the tea table. As he got up and was about to leave, he couldn't help but ask, "May I ask, why did you choose the Twirling Rain Company back then?" The Twirling Rain Company was indeed the largest gaming company on the Stargate base, but there were at least 3 other gaming companies of the same level in the Federation of the Milky Way, and all of them were backed by powerful families. If Jing Jiu intended to do something in the Federation of the Milky Way, those gaming companies were a better choice than the Twirling Rain Company. Jing Jiu didn't give him an answer. Xiaoyu left regretfully. Looking at the chip on the tea table, Ran Handong asked, "What's this?" "See you on the internet." Jing Jiu got up and went to the room next door. There was a gaming cabin of the latest model in the room. He entered the gaming cabin and logged into the game, The Path Toward Heaven. He hadn't logged into the game since the first few days he spent in the hotel of the University of Stargate. He connected to the internet and logged into the game. As a result, the regular players disappeared from his site after he filtered the data and blocked them. As a result, he felt the scenery was much better. The chip was placed in the ring and connected to the central server of the Twirling Rain Company. A great deal of data fell down like a waterfall on the screen with the peaks of Aoyama as the background. These data were the basic information of the players. The Twirling Rain Company had picked out thousands of suspicious accounts after analyzing the data. The suspicious accounts were those accounts that fit the conditions set by Ran Donglu. Even Xiaoyu and the technical department of the Twirling Rain Company didn't know what those conditions meant. Those accounts might have stayed in Aoyama for a long time, or been in a daze outside a manor cave, or flown up in the ocean of clouds on their swords like madmen. It was true that Jing Jiu intended to find other ascendants of Chao Tian through this game. No matter how heartless the cultivation practitioners were, who would miss the opportunity to see Chao Tian where they had lived for a great many years. He just didn't expect Ran Donglu to guess his hidden intention. Of course, not all of these thousands of players were ascenders. According to his calculation, there should be 10 ascendants in the Federation of the Milky Way, and more than half of them would be attracted by this game. The mist flowed out of the peaks and formed a mass in the courtyard by the stream outside the town, obscuring the view from the outside. Suddenly, there was a breeze, and a water wheel was slowly turning on the stream. It was unclear when Ran Handong had sat on it. The stream water fell down noisily. It was a ridiculous scene. I thought it was a Ferris wheel. The female officer's face was a little red as she forcefully suppressed her annoyance. We don't have a Ferris wheel there. Jing Jiao waved his hand to summon the data waterfall into the fog and said, "Let's begin." Ran Handong was the most outstanding cloud ghost in the Federation of the Milky Way, to say nothing of Jing Jiao. It didn't take long before they found more than 30 key suspects from thousands of player accounts. Jing Jiao kicked Ran Handong out of the game without hesitation and started comparing the accounts with those 30 players. Those players were scattered in many places in the Federation of the Milky Way. Some of them were even on the most primitive planets. It was quiet in the gaming cabin. Jing Jiao wore the interactive system with his eyes closed, as if he had fallen asleep. The ring on his finger emitted a faint glow. His awareness drifted along the interplanetary network along with the data flow, passing through those small warped black holes and traveling back and forth among countless galaxies at a speed faster than the speed of light. He hacked into the terminals of those players to find the evidence that they were ascenders. Some of the players looked special and even abnormal, but they were from the Federation of the Milky Way, so Jing Jiao didn't care about them. Some of the players looked ordinary and inconspicuous, but Jing Jiao had memorized their locations and marked them digitally. Unfortunately, he didn't find the Immortal Tan or the Snow Girl. The scenery garden in the game had the everlasting flowers, but it didn't have the everlasting hot pot. It was probably for this reason that the fog didn't last long and the taste was not so good. Jing Jiao didn't go to Cloudy Town to eat the hot pot. He rode the sword up against the clouds and returned to Aoyama, landing on the peak with the thickest fog. Yunqing Peak was also the sword peak. This was the place where the all-in-one sword had first appeared, and it was also the foundation of the Aoyama sect. Even though the information was not blocked, the number of players here was still small. It was because the life here was too boring, and the perception feedback was quite uncomfortable. The uncomfortable perception feedback was the reality of the Sword Peak, or in other words, daily life. Zhao Liu could cultivate diligently here for many years because she had a strong willpower. Jing Jiao could stay here because the formidable sword wills couldn't hurt him. The regular players couldn't stand the sword wills. As such, the young woman in the white dress with floral petals was quite eye-catching among the desolate cliffs. The mountain wind blew over once in a while, bringing with it the cries of the iron eagles. Her black hair was tousled, exposing her snow-white, picturesque face that didn't seem to exist. Jing Jiao walked to her side and followed her line of sight. There were 3 caves on the cliff wall, about 2 feet above the ground, which were convenient for sitting in. One was his, one was Zhao Liu's, and the last one was Ping Yongka's. At the moment, Ping Yongka in the game was sleeping with his eyes closed in the cave, or in other words, cultivating in meditation. The young woman looked at him for a long time and suddenly said, "He looks really ugly." Though Jing Jiao could predict everything that had happened in Aoyama in the last 100 years, he couldn't predict that she would have such an evaluation of the sword spirit of the all-in-one sword. He uttered to express his bewilderment. To some extent, our existence, be it in the external world or the spiritual world, is an imitation and imitation of the human beings. The young woman went on, "So you're very beautiful, and so am I." Why did he turn himself into an ugly fat man? Jing Jiao said, maybe he didn't think that he was learning and imitating the human beings. He thought he was a human being, so he didn't have any requirements for his appearance. Looking at Ping Yongka in the cave, the young woman said, "I don't agree with your opinion. It's because you're a human being and he and I are the same. Should I ask him to come out and meet you?" asked Jing Jiao. The young woman didn't respond to him, but asked, "Did you tell Ran Hand-on that you would join the other side if I didn't support you?" Jing Jiao said, "It's not joining the other side, it's returning." The young woman said, "You've killed an important member of theirs. Do you think they will accept you?" Jing Jiao turned around and walked to the edge of the cliff wall. He looked through the clouds and fog at the iron eagles flying in the outside world and the sword lights designed by the game in the distance. The young woman walked to Jing Jiao's side and looked at the outside world. As far as she could see, the clouds and fog had dispersed, exposing the blue sky and the pleasant green fields of Aoyama. The path toward heaven employed the central system of data partitioning. The key data were stored in the storage device of the Twirling Rain Company. The regular players couldn't modify the data privately. However, both the storage device and the data partitioning were in the world of data and a part of the interplanetary network. She was the true god here, so she was omnipotent and could see whatever she wanted. This is Aoyama. Jing Jiao went on. "I'm from the same sect as them. They have no reason to abandon me because of a scoundrel of the Bloody Demon Church." The young woman pressed, "Why should I believe that you will betray them?" Jing Jiao didn't say anything. He reached out his right hand and pointed at the distance. A blue bird flew over from the distance and landed on his palm. Looking at the blue bird, the young woman said, after a long moment of silence, "If the cooperation is successful, give me the green sky mirror." This blue bird was not the real Qing-er. It looked at the young woman curiously with its dark eyes, unaware that it could be sold by Jing Jiao at any moment. "Okay," said Jing Jiao. The blue bird turned around and shot him a glance. The world in the game was indeed similar to the real world, especially the peaks of Aoyama. It was probably because Jing Jiao had lived here for too many years. Shima Peak pointed at the sky in the distance. The Shanghai Peak was covered with snow. Shuriwe Peak and Shilai Peak looked at each other, speechless. The singing could be heard vaguely on Qingrong Peak. The ocean of clouds on Tianguang Peak was as close as ever, and yet it was so far away. It seemed to be right in front of them. They sat by the cliff's edge, but their feet couldn't reach the top of the cliff. Jing Jiao sat by the cliff's edge for a while, waiting for that person to arrive. The scenery is the same as yesterday. General Li walked out from the hut. According to the design in the game, he didn't wear the military uniform, nor did he wear the red overcoat. He wore a plain sword robe, looking a bit similar to Lu Ci. They were both the sect masters of the Aoyama sect, so it was not surprising that they looked similar. Jing Jiao stood up and bowed to him. "On New Year's Eve, I salute to everyone. I wish everyone good health, a happy family, and a carefree life. As usual, I'll take a break tomorrow. The update will resume on the 16th day of the first lunar month. I love you all very much." Chapter 843. Jing Jiao had not saluted for many years. His grandmaster, Reverend Dao Yuan, left very early, and his master, Reverend Qinzhou, soon followed suit. Those martial uncles in Aoyama were either killed by him and his senior martial brother, or imprisoned in the sword jail. Since then, he had become the person of the highest generation in Chaotian, so he had no need to bow to anybody. However, General Li's seniority was much higher than his. General Li's full name was Li Chunyang. His Taoist name was the Immortal Chunyang when he was in Chaotian. It was the Chunyang Jinren who joined hands with a certain emperor to defeat the underworld army in Ozawa, and thus brought peace between the human world and the underworld for 2,000 years. Chunyang Jinren was the 14th sect master of Aoyama sect, the last sword celestial to ascend, and a master of Dao Yuan Jinren. Li was a common family name, and 5 of the ascendants in Chaotian had the surname Li. Jing Jiao had thought of these 4 at the beginning, but he didn't expect the immortal Chunyang to be one of them. It had nothing to do with any other reason. He just did not want this matter to be related to the ascenders of Aoyama, and he did not want to face his great-grandmaster. Whether he wanted to or not, he had to accept this fact the moment he saw General Li at Tianguang Peak. By the time the immortal Dayuan brought him back to Aoyama from the royal palace of Zhaoga City, the immortal Chunyang had already ascended. He had never seen this great grandmaster teacher before, but he had seen his portrait in that small building. Naturally, he would not be mistaken. The swordsmanship of the immortal Chunyang was exceedingly powerful and as profound as the ocean, not inferior to that of Jingjiao. After he ascended and became the ruler of the Federation of the Milky Way, his cultivation state must have improved. More importantly, this was the Grandmaster. What else was there to fight for? A gust of wind blew through the thatched hut at the top of Tianguang Peak. It came to the edge of the cliff and lifted the sleeves of the two. The sea of clouds at the bottom of the cliff was slightly disturbed. It was unknown whether Jingjiao, who was still maintaining his saluting posture, felt the same. There was no sound in the wind, no breathing, and no narration in the game. Fortunately, this silence did not last for too long. General Li walked to the edge of the cliff and looked at the peaks under the sun with his hands behind his back. After his cultivation, he was called Immortal Chunyang. After his ascension, he was called General Li. There was a sense of separation between yin and yang, just like the sky and the night. I've always thought that little Taoist would be able to ascend, but I've been waiting here for several years, and he still hasn't appeared. Li Chunyang said emotionally. Only after reading the book you wrote did I realize that so many things had happened. Among the elders in Aoyama, the one Jingjiao was most familiar with was not his own master, but his grandmaster, Reverend Dao Yuan. With Reverend Yuan's cultivation base and talent, it would not be difficult for him to ascend and become an immortal. Unfortunately, he could not help but sigh when he thought of the stories from over 1,000 years ago. Did you really kill that traitor from the South Sea? Li Chunyang turned to look at him. Jingjiao said, I joined hands with Lu Xi to kill them. Li Chunyang said, this junior Lu Xi is also not bad. What a pity. It was indeed a pity. With the foundation of Aoyama's sect, if not for so many incidents, there would have been at least 3 more sword deities who had ascended apart from Jingjiao. Jingjiao said, there have always been such pitiful things. Clearly, the two of them did not mean the same thing when they said it was a pity. Li Chunyang was silent for a while, then said, did you have any results when you met with her? Jingjiao said, no. You are a disciple of Aoyama. Even if Qi Song and that warship were destroyed by your sword, she would not believe you. Li Chunyang said, unless you write that we are from Machin Peak in the story, perhaps we can still change this sea of stars. His words seemed indifferent, but they were actually majestic. He was like a whale that had suddenly leaped out of the sea, as if he wanted to swallow everything in the world. In the story of the path toward heaven, in the real world, from the Grandmaster of Aoyama to Li Chunyang, and then to Daoyuan, Qinzhou, Taiping, and Jingyang, the orthodoxy continued. If those who ascended before Daoyuan were all from Machin Peak, then there would be an irreconcilable hatred between them and Jingjiao. The seemingly nonsensical words hid many meanings and possibilities of calculation. Jingjiao naturally understood them. I don't lie, he said. Not lying meant he was confident, because he didn't need to. Of course, if one day he needed to lie, he would be able to do it very well. So, the Cloud Dream Mountain has really been subdued by you? Li Chunyang gave him a deep look. Jingjiao thought that with Tong Yan's ability, she would definitely be able to control the Cloud Dream Mountain with the help of Zhao Liu and the others. That should be the case, he said. Li Chunyang thought of the power of the Bai family 2,000 years ago and said with relief, I didn't expect that you, a junior, would be able to accomplish what we seniors couldn't. Jingjiao didn't want to say anything modest, because that would be too hypocritical. But he also didn't want to say anything complacent, because that would be too smug. As such, he didn't respond. The Twirling Rain Company had done a great job in the game. As the sun moved, the brightness of the sky changed naturally. The shadows of the peaks and the colors of the sea of clouds also changed subtly, looking very pleasing to the eye. Looking at the picturesque scenery, Li Chunyang felt a little nostalgic, saying, it's interesting. Why didn't we think of that? I'm quite free, Jingjiao said. I'll arrive tomorrow. We'll talk about the details when we meet, Li Chunyang said, turned around and walked toward the thatched hut. Soon, he turned into a flowing light and disappeared. This place wasn't the real Aoyama, but the Aoyama in the game, a part of the online world. It would be hard for him to hide anything he said here from the young girl. Looking at the empty thatched hut, Jing Jiao fell silent for a while. Then he walked up to the stone monument, patted the thick shell of the stone turtle lightly, and quit the game as well. The door of the gaming cabin was opened, and Jing Jiao walked out from it. Ran Handong was doing some calculations. Zhong Lizi, Jiang Yuxia, and Hua, she were reading something in the next room. It was probably the homework of the College of Priests. Hearing the sound of the cabin door opening, Zhong Lizi stood up and walked to the door to greet him. Jiang Yuxia got up and was about to boil the tea in the iron kettle. Hua Shi opened her eyes wide, not knowing what she should do. Jing Jiao shot Hua Shi a glance. Hua Shi felt a bit shy and nervous as she bowed to Jing Jiao and greeted him. Jing Jiao didn't say anything. He led Zhong Lizi out of the small building, passing through the lawn and arriving at the manor house. There was a staircase leading to the underground at the deep end of the lawn. It was quiet in the underground passage, devoid of wind, and no floating train came over. "Where are you going?" asked Zhong Lizi curiously after taking the black backpack from Jing Jiao. "I want to find a quiet place." Having said this, Jing Jiao left. There were small holes on the edge of the floating track for collecting rainwater. The sword wheels in the holes soon turned cold. As far as the humans and other intelligent beings were concerned, the planets were their homes. The happy families were all similar, and the planets suitable for the humans to live on were almost the same. The main planet, the Stargate base, and even Chaotian had a similar geological structure. However, the world in Chaotian was twisted into an unbroken plane by the different rules of space, and the Stargate base was turned into a hollow ivory sculpture ball by the distant ancient civilization. The main planet was the only one that retained the original appearance of most of the planets. The deeper one went into the underground. The greater the pressure, the denser the materials, and the higher the temperature. The lava was everywhere, red and warm, like the molten iron in the blacksmith shop. The magma was boiling hot. No, this description was not accurate. It should be extremely hot and blazing. Jing Jiao was soaked in the lava, with only his head exposed to the air. Sensing the pressure and temperature on his skin, he let out a comfortable sigh. He had lived in this strange universe for more than 100 days and encountered some troublesome issues. As a result, he followed Zhong Lizi to the main planet. The environment here was familiar and even intimate to him. It reminded him of the bottom of the Gathered Soul Valley, and he even had the illusion that he was a fetus. The lava in the distance burst out like flowers, looking like the fireworks in the night sky or the nuclear bombs exploding in the universe. Jing Jiao looked at these scenes in silence. It was unclear what was on his mind. After a certain number of flowers had bloomed, Jing Jiao closed his eyes and sank into the lava. The dim surface of the lava broke apart, and the fresh lava gushed out. The lava was as red as fire, looking like the sword light of the thoughtless sword. The spring festival is over. I hope everything will be over soon. I wish you all good health, and don't have to think about anything you don't want to think about. I wish you all a happier life than Jing Jiao. I don't want to say anything else. If everything gets better, let's talk a little more when we start to forget each other many days later. Chapter 844. Squatting in the underground passage, Zhong Lizi stared at the rainwater collecting hole with the remaining faint sword wheels, looking like a bored young girl squatting under a tree and looking at ants. The main preachers of the priest manor and the officials of the government were left outside. Some of them asked her a few questions, but they didn't get any response. She had no idea where Jing Jiao had gone or how long she would have to wait here. All she knew was that Jing Jiao had a mental problem, and he didn't get better after meeting that person. So she was worried. "What are you looking at?" Unexpectedly, it didn't take long before Jing Jiao's voice rang out behind her. Zhong Lizi was startled. She turned around and shot a glance at Jingjio, and then looked at the rainwater collecting hole by the track. "How come you're here so soon?" she asked, opening her mouth. "It's fine as long as I'm here. I don't need to worry about the time." Jingjio had always been patient with her. Time was relative. All he needed was a quiet and isolated environment to think about something and relax his mind. A few minutes and a few decades made no difference. Zhong Lizi took out the clothes she had prepared and helped Jingjio put them on. The two of them returned to the lawn from the underground. The main preachers of the praying hall and the officials of the government had left a long time ago, as if they had never waited here nervously. The huge permanent star was hanging on the horizon. The bright light looked a bit bluish after being filtered by the protective shield. The light shone on the buildings and the lawn and the manor, looking like the starlight that was a few hundred times brighter. "How have you been studying these days?" asked Jingjio. This question seemed to be casual, like the concern between friends, but it startled Zhong Lizi. Such a conversation had never occurred in the underground community or at the University of Stargate. This was a rare thing for Jingjio. It was well known that he cared about the world, but he wouldn't express it verbally even if he did. "Well, it's very difficult." Thinking of the courses she had to attend in the last few days, Zhong Lizi felt a headache coming on. As her personal attendants, Jiang Yuxia and Hua, she had less to learn than her, and they were geniuses whose genes had been modified. Even so, it was still very difficult for them, not to mention Zhong Lizi. "In fact, I've been wondering why I have to memorize the art knowledge, even though some inheritances need to be kept a secret," she said with a blank expression. "I can't even memorize the chronology, let alone the specific content." Jingjio asked, "How did you study?" Zhong Lizi said, "There's a quiet room in the institute. As long as you sit in it and meditate, many knowledge fragments will enter your mind." Logically speaking, this was the absolute secret of the priestesses. She could not tell anyone. However, since Jingjio had asked, she would definitely tell him. The inheritance of the priestess had always been passed down by word of mouth and not written down. This had been criticized and questioned countless times. In the early years, the priestesses could not gain the trust of the human masses, and this had something to do with it. Even in modern times, many people, including those who surrendered, still used this to attack the priestesses. The distant ancient civilization had an exceedingly magnificent culture and advanced technology, but why didn't the female priests reveal all of them to help the humans of the new era develop better and fight against the sea of dark matter? No matter how one looked at it, this didn't make any sense, and it was easy to infer that it was unfavorable to the priestesses. She doesn't believe in humans. This was the explanation given by Jingjio. Zhong Lizi guessed who he was referring to and halted her steps in surprise. Jingjio continued, "Including you people." Looking at a lone tree in the deep end of the grass, Zhong Lizi didn't know what to say. The huge sun sank below the horizon. The stars in the night sky grew brighter instantly, though the brightness was not much different from before. The tree bathed in the starlight looked a bit more sacred and lonelier. Zhong Lizi asked softly, "So, you didn't get along well with that person?" "No, I don't believe in her either," said Jingjio. Though the young woman named Fei didn't believe in the ascendants from Chao Tian, Jingjio was nevertheless different. In the story, The Path Toward Heaven, The Green Sky Mirror and the All-in-One, Qing and Ping Yongka, and the Snow Girl had all proved this point. Zhong Lizi realized what Jingjio meant after being taken aback for a moment. She suddenly felt that Jingjio's figure had become lonelier, like the tree in the grass. Many years ago, at the Plum meeting in Zhaoga City, Jingjio heard the zither music played by Lien Sanyue. Zhao Liu had a similar feeling when she looked at Jingjio. Her gaze fell on Jingjio's earlobe, and she noticed that the gap had become very smooth. It would be hard to notice if she didn't compare it with the other protruding ear. It was probably because Jingjio had touched it with his hand a lot recently. Why did he often touch his earlobe with his hand? It was because he was a bit upset. How could he solve his problem? His finger was not there. "Are you okay?" asked Zhong Lizi. Jingjio didn't answer her question. He took out an object and handed it to Zhong Lizi, saying, "If something happens to you, burn it." It was a paper crane made of yellow paper. It was inauspicious regardless of its material, shape, or the word burn. Looking at Jing Jiao, Zhong Lizi asked in a trembling voice, "What could happen to me?" Jing Jiao said, "It's none of your business. Don't ask." From that apartment building to the hotel at the University of Stargate, and then to this manor, Jing Jiao had brought many changes to her, but he didn't intend to change her completely. For instance, he used the fairy energy to temper her body, but he didn't intend to teach her the cultivation method. The humans in this world were not suitable to cultivate the magic methods of Chao Tian, and Zhong Lizi's talent was ordinary, but these were not the real reasons. Jing Jiao didn't want her to know too many things and have too much connection with him. In this way, she would have a chance to leave when something happened to him. It was true. It was the first time that Jing Jiao wondered if something would happen to him. Yet, it didn't mean that he had lost his confidence. He still thought that he was the strongest ascendant from Chao Tian, save for the Snow Girl. Yet it was different this time. The next morning, the sun hadn't risen yet. The stars were not as bright as they had been before midnight. It was quiet in the manor house. The insects in the meadow were making their last chirping of the day. Ran Handong, who had stayed up all night, washed her face with cold water and employed the jinshi in her body to pull herself together. Then she knocked on the door of the room. Jing Jiao got up from the chair, picked up the black backpack, and headed for the outside of the door. Zhong Lizi couldn't sleep well last night, thinking of the mishap Jing Jiao had mentioned. She didn't fall asleep until the early hours of the morning, and she was woken up by the knocking on the door. She rubbed her eyes and woke up instantly when she saw Jing Jiao's figure. "Where are you going?" she asked after sitting up in bed. "To meet someone." Jing Jiao didn't explain further. He put on a backpack and pulled up the hood of the blue hoodie to block his eyes and brows. Ran Handong smiled at Zhong Lizi and closed the door. She put on the military cap and followed Jing Jiao at a faster pace. The chilly wind blew over from the deep end of the steps, ruffling the grass pieces in the air. The floating train had already left. Standing on the deck and looking at the scene in the distance, Zhong Lizi tightened the pajamas on her body reflexively. Jiang Yuxia and Hua, she walked into the room after hearing the commotion. Zhong Lizi waved her hand to indicate that nothing had happened. Jiang Yuxia glanced at her worriedly. Hua, she walked to the railing and looked at the grass pieces dancing in the wind with wide eyes. Her small face displayed an innocent expression. It was unclear what was on her mind. It was unclear where the floating train had stopped, and the attendants had no idea which station Jing Jiao and Ran Handong had left from. 2 hours later, a black spacecraft landed on the icy land in the extreme south of the planet. "You shouldn't have brought me with you," said Ran Handong while staring into Jing Jiao's eyes. "It's impossible for me not to tell my father about it." The young female officer breathed quickly, turning into a thick white fog in the cold field. "How did you guess it?" asked Jing Jiao. "There are a dozen battleships in the distant space and countless satellites outside the atmosphere, not to mention the monitoring stations on the ground. But we've flown to the extreme south of the planet without being monitored," said Ran Handong with a pale face. "My father can't do it, and neither can that person." She thought that the person who wanted to see Jing Jiao was that person, but she didn't expect that person to come to the icy land in the extreme south, and she didn't see any monitoring during the entire process. In order to achieve such an unimaginable feat, there was a prerequisite, and that was to control the entire military. There is only one person in the world who could do it. "I want to see him," said Jing Jiao. "What do you intend to do?" asked Ran Handong in a trembling voice. A few days ago, the battleship was ablaze in the dark space. The calm and profound voice echoed in the spherical flames. Jing Jiao said that if we meet, the battleship was destroyed as soon as he said this. Nobody knew what the second half of his statement was, and nobody knew what would happen when they met. Maybe nothing would happen. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.